You're here. I'm glad. This corner of the cold isn't meant for everyone, but if you found your way in, maybe you were meant to. Before we settle too deep, feel free to like the video and subscribe if the quiet suits you. And if you feel like it, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. There's something comforting about knowing we're all tucked into our own corners of the world, sharing the same stillness. Now pull the blanket close, let the room dim, maybe crack the window just a little. Let the night in, but not too much. The frost can wait, the fire's low but steady. You've made it through another day, and now we rest. Together. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped outside and my breath didn't vanish. It clung thick and still. The ground, soft yesterday, had turned to stone. The dirt path outside my door, usually squelching with autumn's wet, now crunched beneath my bare heel. A crust had formed, just enough to whisper, "You're late." I hadn't patched the walls, not properly. The thatch above the hearth still had holes, and the clay I was saving for insulation had been left in the wheelbarrow behind the barn. Now it was a frozen slab, no more pliable than a bread loaf left by the fire too long. I hadn't brought in the firewood either. I'd stacked it by the fence under a wool sheet I thought would be enough. It wasn't. Winter had arrived overnight, uninvited, unspoken, and far too early. I didn't curse, didn't shout. I just stood there, letting the frost climb my ankles. My toes stung. My breath fogged the air like a cloud and stayed there, hanging, not disappearing like it should. It was the kind of cold that didn't nip, it bit and held. I turned back inside and shut the door. It didn't latch properly, never had. I'd meant to fix that too. The hearth had burned down to coals in the night, red dots in a sea of ash. I knelt and stirred them with the iron poker, trying to pretend I wasn't trembling, not yet from fear, just cold. But fear would come, I knew that. Winter did that to people. It stripped off your layers of certainty first, then your body followed. I threw in what was left of the kindling. It hissed from last night's damp. I fanned the coals. My lips cracked as I blew. It caught, barely, but flame is flame, and in this house, that's all that mattered. The room lit in jerky orange. Shadows moved like old ghosts across the daubed walls. The ceiling, blackened with years of smoke, seemed to sag closer in the flickering light. The single window, just a cloth nailed across a hole, was stiff with ice on the inside. I hadn't even known that could happen. I went to the chest near the wall and pulled out my winter tunic. It smelled of last year, sweat, wood smoke, and stale wool. I threw it over my shift and tightened the belt hard enough to bruise. My fingers were already going pale. Then the shoes, worn through at the heel. I rubbed the insides with sheep's tallow before slipping them on. Not enough, but it kept the leather soft, for now. I had 37 pieces of firewood. I counted them again just to be sure. 37 wouldn't last 2 weeks, not in this weather. I needed more. I opened the door again. The frost had thickened in the hour since I'd last looked. Ice lined the lip of the bucket beside the well. The chickens hadn't stirred. I didn't see feathers. I saw lumps, frozen in place. Damn, one was already dead, its eye open, a dusting of rime on its beak, like flour. The others huddled in the far corner of the coop, unmoving. I gathered them into the corner of the shed, using straw to line the inside of a broken barrel. Then I ran rope across the entryway and hung old blankets to trap the heat. It wouldn't save them all, but it might buy a day. I walked the yard in circles, stamping my feet, not for warmth, but for thought. The woodpile, the roof, the hole in the eastern wall. I only had light until maybe 4 hours past dawn, less if the clouds came. I started with the pile. I peeled the wool sheet back and it cracked like parchment. Beneath, the logs were soaked through. The frost had sunk into the heart of them. They'd need drying. I picked the driest ones first, 7 of them, and stacked them by the hearth. Then I went to the barn. The roof above the animals was sagging. The mule kicked once in greeting, then turned his back to me. You're not getting hay until I fix that leak, I muttered. I dug out the last bundle of reeds from the corner. They smelled like swamp water, last spring's harvest, half mildewed. Still, I climbed up and patched the worst hole. My fingers bled by the time I finished. When I came down, I sucked the cut, tasted copper. My hands were stiff and red, not frostbitten yet, but they would be if I wasn't careful. Then the wall, eastern side, behind the bedrolls. I hadn't noticed it till last week, just a hairline crack, a place where the cold slipped in at night like a thief and stole the warmth from my bones. I pushed the bed aside, then mixed ash, clay and straw into a thick paste using the last of my water. It steamed as I stirred it, hot hands in the cold, almost pleasant. I smeared it into the crack, pressing with the heel of my palm until it held. The wall hissed, the clay freezing almost as fast as I worked. When I was done, I sat by the fire and counted my breaths. The sun hadn't risen far. Shadows still reached across the field. I hadn't eaten. I had bread, a stump of it, harder than the floorboards. I dipped it in the soup from last night, the pot still warm beside the fire, carrots, barley and bone. It tasted like ash, but it filled my belly. I'd meant to trade for fat at the last market, but I'd held back. Thought I had time. Thought I'd have another warm week. One more week to patch, to plan. Winter didn't care about my schedule. A knock. 2 short raps. I opened the door and saw Hannel. He looked worse than I did. Frost clung to his beard. His tunic was stiff with it. "You heard?" he asked. "No. What?" "Idric's boy. Found him in the stream this morning. Went out for water and didn't come back." "How old?" 7. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. "He didn't fall in," Hannel added. "Just didn't get back in time." I nodded. He handed me a stick of wood, birch, clean and dry, probably his best. "1 for 1, he said. And I handed him one of mine, damp, heavy. It wasn't fair, but he took it anyway. That was the rule. The first trade of winter wasn't about fairness. It was about reminding each other that we were still neighbours. He turned to leave, paused. "It's coming harder this year," he said. "I know." And then he was gone. I closed the door, latched it with a piece of twine. Inside, the fire crackled. The clay on the wall was already whitening with frost. I wrapped myself in 2 blankets and watched the light shift on the floorboards. The frost had come early. Everything that followed would come harder, and I wasn't ready. But now I had to be. The house isn't finished, but the wind is already testing the seams. With blistered hands I dig low. If I can't live beneath the wind, I won't live at all. The wind came back before dawn. I heard it long before it touched the door, low at first, like a breath drawn through teeth, then rising, the kind that doesn't knock, it pushes, tests every corner of the house like a thief running its hands along a wall, looking for a way in. It found one, several. I lay there on my side, wrapped in 2 blankets, with the hearth's heat already gone cold behind me. I could hear the wind slipping under the eastern wall, whistling through the patch I'd laid down the day before. The daub had cracked in the night, shrunk too fast, dried wrong. I should have known better, but the frost hadn't given me time to wait for perfect mixtures. The floor was colder than it should have been. I pressed my hand against it. The dirt was hardening from beneath. If I didn't act today, the ground would freeze solid. Once that happened, I wouldn't be able to dig. And if I couldn't dig, if I couldn't sink the house, then this winter would be my last. I forced myself up and moved stiffly to the window cloth. The air was still black outside, but the edge of the horizon had turned the colour of old iron. Light was coming. I took the bread from last night, bit off a corner, chewed without tasting. It cut the roof of my mouth. I swallowed it anyway. Then I grabbed the spade. It wasn't much. Wood handle, iron tip, 1 crack near the grip. I'd meant to replace it, like everything else. The frost clung to the door as I pulled it open. The hinges groaned. I ignored them, stepped outside. The sky was wide and pale, like stretched hide. No clouds. That was worse. Clear skies meant colder mornings. I could already feel it sinking past my tunic, through the fabric, against my bones. I walked to the southern edge of the house, and that's where the ground dipped naturally. I'd started digging weeks ago, a shallow trench to guide rainwater away from the wall. I never deepened it. Now I would. If I couldn't sink the house, I would sink myself into the earth. I drove the spade down once. The ground fought me. I leaned harder. The second strike split a crust of ice. Underneath, mud. Still soft. For now. I dug. Every strike was work, not just on my arms, on my lungs, my back, my hands. The blister on my palm burst before the hour was done. The warmth from it vanished as quick as it came. The mud stuck to the blade. I stomped it free with my heel. I kept digging. The first layer was easy enough. Soft soil, autumn-rich. Then came the clay, sticky, stubborn, clinging to the iron like it belonged there. Each scoop pulled like it was reluctant to leave. I went down a foot, then 2. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just smeared its colour along the trees. No warmth came with it. At the 3rd foot I stopped, not because I was tired, but because I was losing light and needed to shape the pit before it froze again. The goal wasn't just depth, it was design. I carved a step around the inner ring, a shallow bench where I could sit or lay a cloth, then a ledge near the far wall where I'd build the fire pit. That was where the warmth would live now, not in the centre of the room, but in the belly of the house. Heat rises, cold sinks, but not if I sink first. When the trench was done, I pulled the door off its hinges and set it aside. Then I began to lower the frame. I had to lift the walls first, just an inch, just enough to clear the trench. I used a wedge and my own shoulder, grunting, not shouting. The cold eats sound. I could barely hear my own breath anymore. The southern wall cracked as I pushed it forward, then settled with a groan. The roof shivered, but held. I used stone to brace the new footing, pounded mud into the gaps. It wouldn't last forever. Just the season. That's all I needed. Once the wall was lowered and the trench sealed, I dragged the door frame back and rehung it. The gap beneath it was gone now. The floor sat a foot lower than it had that morning. I wasn't done, not even close, but I was below the wind now. Back inside, the light cut through the cloth-covered window like a blade. I wiped my face with a sleeve. My nose was bleeding. I hadn't noticed. The hearth was out. I rebuilt it with one of the dry logs Hannel had traded me. It caught fast. The new pit design worked. Heat climbed out of the sunken hearth and rolled up the walls. Not far, not full, but enough to matter. I stood over it, arms crossed, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. That's when I heard it. A low knock, then a second. No voice, just a fist on wood. I opened the door and saw Merrin. Her coat was dusted with snow, her hood pulled low. "They're sealing the coop at Hall's place," she said, "using dung and straw. Thought you'd want to know. How bad is it?" She looked behind her. "We lost 5 birds last night. Not just cold. Rats. They're coming in from the fields." Rats meant the fields had frozen. The burrows were collapsing. They were looking for heat, food. They'd chew through leather, wood, even skin if they got hungry enough. "I'll double the lining," I said. "Tonight." She nodded, handed me something wrapped in cloth. 3 eggs, the last we have. I took them. "I'll trade you once I smoke the rabbit." "You catch one?" I nodded, lied. I hadn't, not yet. But I would. I'd have to. She left without another word. The eggs were warm, just slightly. She must have carried them close to her body the whole way. I placed them by the hearth, not too close, just enough to hold their heat. Then I looked at the shovel again. The trench was done, but the idea had taken root. If the fire worked better down, maybe the bedding would too. I moved the sleeping platform next, dragged it toward the back corner, lifted it up, pulled the straw away, and began to dig again. This time, only a foot, just enough for a hollow. Then I packed the earth with straw, layered it with a wool mat, and laid the bedding into the hollow, like a nest, like the kind foxes dig when they know the wind's about to turn. I'd sleep there tonight. The sun hit the edge of the trees and began to fall. By the time the sky turned red, I'd sealed the last of the wall gaps with a new mix of dung and ash. Better binding, less cracking. The smell was foul, but the warmth was real. I boiled the soup again, the last of the barley, a knob of fat scraped from the side of a sheep bone. I dipped a corner of bread and let it soak till it softened, swallowed it whole. Then I lay in the nest, pulled the blanket to my chin and let my body relax just slightly. I couldn't hear the wind anymore. That was good, but I knew it hadn't gone. It was waiting above the roofline, listening, sniffing, finding new ways to slip inside. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow I'd smoke a rabbit, or catch one, or steal one. But tonight I was in the earth, and the wind was not, we call it daub, but it's more honest to say it's filth and desperation packed into walls. Every gap I patch is a promise I might not freeze tonight. Every crack I miss could kill me. I woke to the sound of the wall breathing. Not wind, not a rat, just the wall, sighing out the cold it couldn't keep. The patch I'd made on the east side yesterday had already cracked again. A hairline slit, thin as a thread, but wide enough to invite the kind of cold that settles under your nails and waits for you to stop moving. I slid out of the bed hollow and winced when my heel touched bare floor. It burned, then numbed. I wrapped both feet in rags before standing fully, then bent and pressed my thumb against the crack in the wall. Still damp, still warm near the fire, but already pulling apart. I needed a new mix. What I had wasn't holding. Too much ash, not enough binder. I pulled on my wool tunic, still damp from yesterday's sweat, and shoved open the door. The cold had grown teeth overnight. It bit through everything. I stepped out into it. The yard looked the same, still dusted with a thin crust of frost, but the air told a different story, still as death, heavy, like the sky was holding its breath. I went first to the latrine pit and scraped a shovel into the pile beside it. This is where it starts. Daub isn't romantic. It isn't ancient craft or clever tradition. It's excrement, straw, and dirt smashed together into a wall with nothing but your fists, and sometimes your knees. I took a full load back to the house and dumped it in the corner by the hearth, then went again for more. 2 trips, then 3. On the 4th I passed Hannel walking back from the woods, a bundle of sticks slung over his shoulder. "You sealing today?" he asked. "Trying to. Use blood if you have to. Won't hold long, but it tightens the mix." I didn't ask if he meant animal or his own. Back at the house, I spread a cloth and began mixing. Half-rotted straw, pulled from the mule's bedding, clay soil from the trench, dung from the pit. A splash of water warmed on the fire. I mashed it together with both hands until it stopped resisting and became one thing. Then I tested a lump, squeezed it in my palm. It held its shape. Good. I added a handful more straw and began packing it into the cracks, the new split on the eastern wall first, then the corners where the cold gathered, in that quiet, predatory way. It was slow work, filthy work. My sleeves were soaked through, my fingernails packed with brown. The smell didn't bother me anymore. That was its own kind of worry. After the first hour, I started on the outer wall, behind the shed, where the cold came harder off the open field. Here, the daub had gone brittle, crumbled like old bread. I scraped out the bad sections and packed in the new. With every handful, I pressed hard, using the heel of my fist to drive it deep. Each patch felt like a gamble. Too dry and it'll crack. Too wet and it'll slump. Too cold and it'll seize before it sets. But I couldn't wait for the right weather. That passed 2 weeks ago. By midday, I'd gone through half the mix and couldn't feel my thumbs. I stood, stretched my back, and drank from the water bucket. It tasted of smoke and ash, but it was wet. That's what mattered. Then I went to the coop. 3 birds left, one with a limp, one missing half its tail feathers. They'd eaten nothing this morning. I opened the feed sack and found the last of the grain clumped in the bottom, damp. I spread it thin anyway, across a dry board. They pecked without joy. Inside I took what was left of the daub mix and spread it along the inside seams of the coop. I sealed the roofline first, then the corners. I stuffed straw into the nest boxes, higher than usual, thick like bedding. I don't know if they'd last the week, but they'd last tonight. On my way back to the house, I spotted movement near the stone fence, a figure, hooded, hunched, walking slow. I grabbed the axe from the post by the door and stepped into view. The figure raised a hand. It was Elder, old, thin. She looked like wind could fold her in half. "I came for fire," she said. "Wood? No, just fire." I looked down at the coals in my hearth. I had enough to light another fire, barely. I found a clay pot near the stove, poured a handful of hot embers into it and covered it with ash. She took it without speaking. Her hands were red with cracks. "You should daub your southern wall," I said. "It's weeping heat." She nodded, then shuffled off. I watched her until she disappeared over the rise. By the time I turned back to the house, the light had shifted. Shadows ran long over the frozen ground. I pulled the last of the mix together and went inside. The corner by the bedding was leaking cold again. I hadn't noticed the split near the roofline, just above head height. It had run like a vein down the wall. I stood on the bench and pressed in the last of the daub. It was stiff now, half frozen. It fought me harder than the wind had. When it was done, I sat by the hearth and stripped off my outer tunic. The sleeves steamed in the firelight. I watched the steam curl upward until it vanished into the rafters. I'd used half my straw supply today, a full day's worth of strength. My hands stung, my arms ached, but the air inside the house didn't move anymore. That meant something. That meant I could sleep without waking to breath that fogged the air above my face. I boiled water, threw, in what remained of the carrot tops and a piece of salt pork no larger than my thumb. It cooked fast. I didn't wait for flavour. I drank it hot. Then I walked the room, testing with the back of my hand every wall. The east side was dry. The northern wall no longer whistled. Near the bedding, where I'd packed the last of the mix, I felt it, still warm, still holding. I crawled into the nest and pulled the wool up to my chin. Above me the roof groaned in the wind, but nothing got in. I'd sealed the cracks with mud, straw, and shit. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, but it was warm, and that was enough. The fire is lit, but the heat won't stay. The smoke hangs low, choking me, and the child asleep on the floor. I learn quickly. The hearth demands as much breath as it gives. The house is sealed now. The wind can't get in, but neither can anything else. I wake coughing. The hearth is still burning, barely, just enough to throw light against the far wall and shadow everything else. But the air is thick, not warm, heavy. Smoke hovers just above my head like a low ceiling, swirling slowly in place, refusing to rise. My throat burns, my eyes water. I wipe them with the corner of the wool blanket and squint across the room. There's a body near the fire. Not a body, a shape, curled small, the child. It takes a moment before I remember how he got here. His mother came late last night, hair frozen to her shoulders, eyes wide but dry. "He's cold," she said, "more than cold." I didn't ask for names. I didn't ask where she was going next. Just opened the door and pointed to the floor by the hearth. She left him and went back into the dark. Now he's breathing, but shallow. I see the rise and fall beneath the wool I laid over him. He doesn't stir when I kneel next to him, doesn't cough like I do. Too much smoke, too little air. I stand and stagger to the door, pull the cloth from the window hole. It's stiff with frost, but tears easily. I swing the door open and the cold pours in like a scream. The smoke doesn't drift, it explodes, pours out in a cloud so dense it makes the air outside look darker than it should. I bend low, close to the floor, and wave the air with a flat board. It clears slowly, enough for breath, enough to keep the fire alive without killing the people huddled next to it. But I know now I've sealed the house too well. Yesterday I was freezing. Today I'm choking. The hearth was never meant to sit low in a sunken house without draught. I'd built it right in the bin, fully of the room, thinking it would trap heat. It does, but it traps everything else too. I tear the cloth into strips and hang it like a flap over the door instead of sealing it shut. That'll help a little. Let the air move. It'll take warmth with it, but not all of it. Next, I find the knife and crawl onto the bench beneath the roofline. The smoke stains are thickest up here. The beam above the hearth is black as pitch. I cut a hole, just a small one, near the top. I stab the blade into the daub between the slats and dig until I see air on the other side. Smoke rushes toward it. It moves like a creature escaping a cage. It isn't much, just a thin line of rising steam, but enough. I build a funnel from reeds tied together with twine and fit it into the hole. Widen the opening around it with the heel of my knife. A crude chimney, but better than none. Back on the floor, I blow on the fire again. This time the smoke lifts, not perfectly, but enough to clear the middle of the room. I check the child. His lips are no longer pale. His cheeks are dry, still asleep, still breathing. I sit beside him and lay another log on the coals, one of the dry ones, birch. It catches fast and flares bright. For a moment, the room glows. I reach for the pot and ladle out the last of last night's broth. It's thick now, congealed from the cold. I reheat it on a flat stone beside the flame and eat slowly. I think about the boy's mother, whether she reached her kin, whether she found fire, whether she froze. I push that thought down and stand again. The hearth needs better stones. The heat's too narrow. It flares up and dies fast. I need something to hold the warmth longer, store it, release it slowly through the night. I step outside. The sky is white, not snowing, not yet, but thick with it. I can feel it in my teeth, in the way the light doesn't touch the ground. I walk to the edge of the pasture, near the fence. Stones line the old stream bed, rounded, dense, untouched since last thaw. I gather 5, carry them one by one in my arms like sleeping animals. Back inside, I lay them around the fire, one on each side, one flat beneath the pot, 2 in the back. They don't look like much now, but by sundown they'll be hot enough to keep the child warm till morning. I place the back of my hand on the stones already there. They hold nothing, still cold, but that will change. The child stirs. He wakes slowly, blinks once, then again, looks at the ceiling like he forgot there was one. He sits up. "You're not dead," I say. He nods, doesn't speak. "You're hungry." Another nod. I hand him what's left of the broth. He sips slowly, both hands on the bowl, doesn't spill a drop. "How old?" He shrugs. "Where's your mother?" "Nothing." I don't ask again. Instead, I hand him a heel of bread, soft from steam. He tears it in half and offers it back. I shake my head. He eats both halves. Later, he sits by the fire while I adjust the stones again. The chimney's working better now. The air feels clearer. The smoke rises straight, not sideways. I mix a new daub patch, this one for the chimney base. Seal the reed funnel tighter. Even any good gust could push the smoke back down if I don't shape it right. It's almost dark when I finish. The child hasn't spoken, but he hasn't cried either. He follows me with his eyes, like he's waiting for the house to fall down or the fire to explode, like that's the only way the world works now. I lay the bedding closer to the stones, layer extra wool beneath him, then I pull another ragged tunic over his legs. He lays down without a word. I sit beside the hearth and watch the fire. It's steady now, low and clean, no more choking smoke, no more black breath, but it's still hungry. It wants more wood, more ash, more attention. The hearth is a mouth. It takes, and if you feed it well, it gives you just enough back to live. I understand that now. I lay another log on. Watch it catch. The boy coughs once in his sleep. Outside, the sky opens and snow begins to fall. But inside, the smoke finally rises. The sun lies. It looks warm, but it's just light. I chase hours of work in the cold, dragging timber with numb fingers while the sky mocks me. The sun broke over the horizon like it meant something. Gold on the trees, soft light on the snow. For a moment, I believed it. Thought maybe today would be different, less cruel, more manageable. It wasn't. The light gave no warmth. It only revealed how much I hadn't done. The woodpile was half what it should be. I'd burned through too much, too quickly. The smoke-choked morning had cost a whole day's supply just to keep the child breathing. The stones around the hearth were warm now, sure, but they'd drawn more heat than I'd expected. That meant I needed more fuel, and I needed it now. The boy was still asleep, curled against the bedding hollow, tucked tight into the wool. I left him there and stepped outside. The snow from the night had hardened into a crust over the ground, not deep yet, but enough to hide danger underneath. I pulled the axe from the stump beside the shed. The blade had dulled from the knotwood last week. I hadn't taken time to sharpen it. Another mistake. I wrapped my hands in cloth and tightened the wrappings with twine. Then I set off toward the woodline. The sun was high now, but the cold hadn't moved. It wrapped around me the whole way, silent and tight, as if the trees themselves were exhaling frost. I reached the grove just beyond the stream bed. Deadfall lay scattered like bones, birch limbs, dry alder, even a few pieces of pine, resin slick and blackened at the ends. I tested each with a boot. Anything that snapped clean I marked with a twig. Anything too wet I left. Even desperation has rules. The axe bit poorly. I had to strike twice, sometimes 3 times, just to split the thinner pieces. My arms shook. My breath turned sharp in my nose. I dragged the first bundle back on a sled, a repurposed door. Laid flat with rope handles, it scraped loud across the crusted snow, echoing through the trees. Not safe, not quiet, but I had no choice. By the time I returned for the second haul, the sun had shifted behind the clouds. The world turned blue. That's the trick of daylight in winter. It promises time. It promises safety. But the shadows move faster now. They stretch, reach, creep across the ground until you blink, and the day is gone. By the third trip, my fingers had stopped feeling anything at all. Even through cloth and wool, I couldn't feel the axe in my hand. I gripped tighter out of instinct. My knuckles cracked, blood welled beneath the wrappings. I didn't stop. I hauled as much as I could, enough for 2 days, maybe 3 if the wind stayed low. When I turned back toward the house, the sky was already dim. The sun had fooled me again. Inside, the boy was awake, sitting up, eyes wide. "You were gone," he said. "I'm back. You left the fire." I left its stones. They held. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I dropped the wood beside the hearth and began stacking it, smallest pieces first, set aside for kindling, then the thick cuts, then bark. The boy watched me work. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "I live here." "No, I mean, why not go south?" "Too far. Too late." He was quiet after that. I peeled the wrappings off my hands. The skin underneath was raw, shiny with blood where the cracks had split open. I dunked them into a bowl of melted snow by the fire. The pain came fast, sharp. It made my jaw lock. The boy didn't look away. "You're hurt. It's winter," I said. That was all. I added new fuel to the fire, watched the flames catch. The warmth came slower than I wanted, but it came. Outside, the light was gone. I turned back to the boy. "Do you know how to feed the fire?" He nodded. I handed him a short piece of birch. Add this if I sleep too long, only this size. Nothing larger, the air's still thick. He took it, held it like it might vanish. I lay back on the mat beside the hearth, not to sleep, just to close my eyes, just for a moment. But the day had taken more than I expected. I woke in the dark. The boy had placed the log exactly as I'd told him. The fire still glowed. He was sitting cross-legged now, staring at the door. "There's someone outside," he said. I sat up. No sound, no footsteps, but I could feel it, a weight against the silence. I moved to the window slit, peeled the cloth back just enough to see. Nothing. Then a shape, far off, near the edge of the fence line, upright still, not walking, not calling, just standing. I watched for a long minute. It didn't move. "Stay here," I told the boy. I stepped outside with the axe in hand. The cold had deepened, the kind of cold that eats through every stitch of wool like it was air. My breath came fast, but I moved slow. Crunch, crunch, step by step across the frozen yard. The shape didn't move. 10 feet away I saw it clearly. A bundle of cloth hung from the post at the edge of the fence. A message. Inside, a sack, half full. I touched it, still warm, fresh, meat, wrapped in hide. A rabbit, gutted, bled, gifted. No note, no mark, but I knew who had left it. Hannel, or maybe Elder. One of them had noticed how thin I was, or maybe they saw the boy. I turned back to the house. The sky had gone pitch black. The wind had picked up again. Daylight was gone. The warmth inside was barely holding, but the fire was still lit, and the meat in my hand would boil down into something worth living for. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. The boy didn't ask what it was. He just watched as I hung the rabbit above the fire. He'd with sinew, dripping slow into the pot. He didn't smile, but his eyes closed, just for a second. Tomorrow the sun would lie again, but tonight the fire told the truth. I wake in the dark again, not from nightmares, just routine. Midnight belongs to whispers, embers, and frost blooming on the inside of my walls. I wake without fear. That's how I know it's the hour between lives. No alarm, no sound, just breath in my chest and cold in my bones. Not enough to kill, just enough to remind me that I'm still here. I open my eyes and stare into the dark. The coals from the fire still glow, faint and red, tucked in like teeth beneath ash. The boy is curled tight near the hearthstones, face half hidden in the wool. He's not shivering. That's good. I sit up slowly, pulling the wool off my legs, letting my feet touch the floor before I brace for the cold. The second sleep doesn't care about comfort. It comes when it pleases, and it ends just as silently. Outside, the wind brushes the roof like a hand testing for cracks. Inside, frost has crept across the inner wall again, just a shimmer near the joints in the wood, spreading in lines like veins. I run my finger over it. It's dry, brittle. The heat has dropped, not gone, just thinned. The chimney I carved still works, but it breathes with the weather now, lets in more cold than it lets out smoke on nights like this. I can feel the shift, the way the pressure dips just enough to tug at your lungs. I take the poker and stir the coals. A tiny flame licks up from the heart of the ashes. I add 2 small twigs, dry birch, thin as a finger. They catch almost at once. No rush. The second sleep is long. I've got time to coax it back to life. I move quiet. The house is still. This isn't the sleep of dreams. This is the waking that comes after the first rest, when the body stirs but the world doesn't. No birds, no bells, just the slow tick of heat fading and frost taking its place. Most people don't talk about it, but we all do it. First sleep, second breath, wake, tend the fire, piss in a pot, check the wick. And now lay back down. Some talk, some pray, some don't return to sleep at all. Tonight I listen. There's a rhythm to the creaks in the wall, one above the hearth, settling timber. One behind the coop, frost warping a beam. One from the roof, the weight of snow pressing just a bit more than it did yesterday. I grab the bowl near the hearth and sip the broth left from dinner. It's cool now, but not spoiled, just flat. The fat has congealed on top, forming a pale skin. I stir it in and drink anyway. The boy stirs, doesn't wake, just shifts closer to the fire. I throw my coat over him. Then I stand and stretch my arms above my head. My shoulders crack, my spine follows. I wince. There's a quiet pain in the small of my back now that wasn't there last week. Digging, hauling, stooping, it all adds up. I feel it more at this hour than any other, like the dark gives the aches permission to speak. I walk to the door, lift the cloth flap, peek outside. Nothing but black, but not silent. Somewhere far off, too far to name, I hear it. A low howl, not wind, not man. Wolf, not close, not yet, but moving. I close the flap and wedge a board against the door, just enough to make noise if something pushes it open, not enough to stop it. But then again, if something comes in, I'm not planning to stop it with wood. I return to the fire. The twigs are gone now, burned down to curl and ash. I add a thumb-thick branch. It catches. The warmth lifts again. The stones around the hearth glow with it. I check the ones by the bedding next. Still warm, dull to the touch, but enough to hold us till dawn. The house smells like wood and wool and faint smoke. No rot, no damp. That's the part I'm proud of. A dry house in winter is a rare thing. I pull the basket from under the bench. Inside, 3 apples, wrinkled, soft. One split down the side. I take the best one and bite. It's tart, dry in the centre, but it's food. I chew slow. The minutes pass like smoke, shifting, fading. I remember when I used to count the stars during this hour, back when I lived in a higher house, with windows, before I learned the value of low ceilings and south-facing walls. Now there's no sky, just the ceiling above me and the sound of another breath across the room. The boy stirs again. "You're up," he whispers. "So are you. I had a dream, good or bad." "I don't know. It had teeth." I nod. "Dreams can't bite," I say. "They can watch, though. That one stops me." "Go back to sleep," I tell him. He turns over, wraps the coat tighter. I toss another small log on the fire, not because I need it, just for something to do, something to keep the silence from settling too deep. When it catches, I sit and stretch my legs toward the warmth. I flex my toes inside the cloth wrappings, feel the heat soak back in. I used to hate this hour, thought it stole time from me, thought it was wasted space between real rest. Now I see it for what it is. It's not lost. It's preparation. This is when the air tells you if snow is coming, if the wind will shift, if the house will hold. This is when you check the seams. I walk the walls again, not with panic, just precision. The eastern patch is holding. The chimney leak hasn't widened. The bedding hollow is dry. The roofline hasn't sagged. I nod to myself. Then I sit one last time, this time on the edge of the bed platform, watching the fire's pulse slow. I've got maybe an hour before dawn, maybe less. I settle back into the hollow, pull the wool to my chin, close my eyes. Second sleep isn't deep, but it's enough. I find her frozen stiff near the door, eyes wide, beak open like she tried to call me. It's not about losing a meal, it's about knowing I'm next if I don't get smarter. The frost was already crusting the inside of the window cloth when I stirred from second sleep. The fire had dimmed to a smear of red in the hearth. The stones still held warmth, but just barely. The boy was wrapped tight, breathing slow, wool up to his nose. He hadn't stirred. I stood, bones creaking, and stepped to the door. Outside, the world had changed again. The snow was deeper, maybe by an inch, maybe 2. It was hard to say with the wind smoothing it flat across the ground like a sheet. The sun hadn't risen. Everything was still blue and quiet and sharp. I made my way to the coop. The latch was stiff, iced at the edge. I pried it with the knife, breath steaming. The door opened slow. The scent inside was wet feathers and old straw. They were huddled in the back corner, all but one. She was near the entrance, crumpled in the straw, neck twisted, one wing half raised like she'd tried to shield herself. The frost had taken her during the night, beak open, eyes white. She looked surprised. I didn't speak, didn't curse, just knelt beside her and touched the breast, cold through, stiff, no warmth left to salvage. The others blinked at me from the dark, not moving, not even clucking, just watching. They knew what happened. I wasn't sure they knew why. I carried her back to the house. Inside, the boy was awake, staring at the fire. "She's dead," I said. He nodded, didn't ask who. I set the chicken down on the bench and reached for the knife. Not to waste her. Not today. The cold had preserved the meat. She could still feed us. But that wasn't what made my stomach tighten. It was the why. She hadn't frozen because of a storm or some freak cold. She'd frozen because the door let wind in, because I hadn't. To fix the floor seam under the coop, because I'd thought a few layers of old straw would hold. I dressed the bird over a bowl, feathers off in clumps, skin pale, tight, already drying. The organs were still intact, frozen in shape, almost no blood left to drain. She'd died quietly. When I was done, I placed the meat on a slate tile and left it outside the door. Let the wind finish what the fire didn't need to. Then I went to the coop. The gap beneath the wall was wider than I remembered. Maybe the wind had worked it loose. Maybe a rat had tried to dig. Either way, it was there now, an open mouth for cold. I didn't have much to patch it. The daub was frozen stiff in the bucket. I kicked it over and broke it with the heel of my boot, packed what I could into the hole, layering it with straw and pressing it firm with my fist. I hammered a board over it, not to seal it, but to slow the wind. Then I pulled the extra wool scrap from the shed and nailed it across the interior corner. Inside the house, the boy watched me strip off the gloves and sit by the fire. "You said she was warm yesterday," he said. "She was." "Then how did she die?" "Same way we will," I said, "if I get lazy." He didn't speak after that. The chicken took most of the day to thaw properly. I boiled her down in a clay pot with the last of the herbs I'd dried in autumn, rosemary, sage, a pinch of dried onion. The smell filled the house like a memory. It didn't make me feel better. I carved what I could from the bones and set the pot back on the stones to simmer low. Then I stepped outside again. The coop was quiet. The others didn't move much when I checked, just blinked. Their beaks were pale, their feathers dull. The food tray was empty, but not pecked clean, just forgotten. They were slowing down. Cold does that to small things, makes them forget to eat. I scattered the last of the dry grain and closed the door. Later, as the sun began to drop, I took the bones from the pot and laid them in a cloth to dry. I'd grind them later, use them to enrich the soil when the ground softened again, if it ever did. The boy ate without speaking. He tore the meat with his fingers, chewed slow, left nothing. When he was done, he looked up. "She was the red one," he said. I nodded. She was my favourite. "She was the first," I said. "Let's not have a second." That night I laid the axe beside the door and slept with one hand on the wool, in case the cold came back before I did. The communal oven is lit, and so are the lies we bake into our daily bread. I burn my hands. Someone else burns their truth. Fire eats everything the same. The smoke from the hill told me the oven was lit. Thick and black in the morning sky, it curled up like a signal, not of celebration, not of warmth, but of order. You saw that smoke, and you knew what day it was, what hour, whose turn, who brought dough, who didn't. Communal baking wasn't a kindness, it was duty, measured in heat and flour and shame. I wrapped the loaf in cloth before I left. Mine was rough, barely risen, the grain ground coarse between two cracked stones. No salt, no lard, just meal and water and the hope that it held together long enough not to crumble before the heat touched it. The boy watched me tie the bundle. "Will they let you bake it?" "They'll let me burn it, if nothing else." I left him with a cup of broth and the last third of an apple, then stepped into the wind. The snow crunched differently this morning. Wet, brittle, shallow in some places, drifted in others. I kept my head down, shoulders tucked forward, breath tight in my scarf. The path to the oven cut across the common field, now stripped bare and bone-pale under the weak sun. The oven stood at the far edge of the village, a round brick hump with a stone mouth, blackened from years of fire, older than most of the houses around it, older than some of the people too. A group had already gathered, Hannel, Mira, Elric's widow. They stood with arms crossed, loaves under their coats, eyes on the smoke. None of us spoke at first. When the oven was hot enough, Mira pulled the iron rod across the door and threw it wide. The rush of heat pushed the frost back in a wave. Inside, the coals were white with hunger. We filed in by turns. The loaves were placed in order of arrival. That was the rule. You didn't cut. You didn't barter. I set mine on the stone slab and stepped back. "You forgot to score it," Mira said. "It won't rise high enough to need it." She didn't argue. I moved to the side wall near the woodpile and waited. The baking took hours. It always did. The heat was slow, deep and stubborn. It touched the bread from the inside out, and if your dough was too wet, too dry, too anything, the oven would show it. That's what made it fair. The oven didn't lie. People did. We spoke in low voices while we waited. Hannel talked about a fox near the traps. Mira whispered that someone had broken into the winter stores behind her shed. No names, just tension. Even the air smelled like suspicion, sour and thick and close. When my loaf was pulled out, the edge had cracked, not split, not burned, but broken, just enough to show the dryness in the mix. I touched the side with my bare fingers before I thought better of it. Burn. I pulled back fast, bit my lip. Someone chuckled behind me. I didn't look. Pain and embarrassment warmed faster than fire. Elric's widow handed me a rag. I nodded thanks, but didn't meet her eyes. Back home, the boy sat beside the hearth, poking the coals with a stick. "Did it bake?" "It baked," I said. He looked at my fingers. "You burned. A little." We tore the loaf in half and ate it with broth. The crust was dense, the middle heavy, but it was warm. Later that day, Mira came to the door. She brought a crust heel in one hand and a scrap of news in the other. "They're checking cellars," she said. "Why?" "Because someone's hoarding lard. Elric's widow said she smelled it in the oven. Maybe she imagined it. She didn't. I didn't ask who they suspected. I knew. If your bread rose too well, if it had colour or softness or a smell that didn't belong, someone noticed. And they didn't think you were clever. They thought you were cheating." I thought back to the others that morning, the way Mira had watched Elric's widow, too quiet, the way Hannel didn't look up when her loaf came out golden, when the scent of something richer than flour hung in the air just long enough to be noticed. The oven burned truth into everything. Later that night, after the boy had fallen asleep, I sat by the hearth with the crust in my lap and the burn throbbing in my hand. I thought about lard, how much it would take to change the loaf, how little you'd need to make it taste like survival. Then I thought about lies, how soft they bake, how hot they burn. The village meets not to talk, but to warm. Body heat is rationed like bread. I pretend not to notice how long they hesitate before letting me in. The wind rose too early today. It howled through the trees before the sun had even broken the treetops. Not sharp like usual, but deep, like it was dragging something behind it. A sound you didn't just hear but felt in your chest. The boy huddled by the hearth, eyes wide, blanket up to his mouth. "We're going to the hall," I said. He looked at me like I'd said we were leaving the world entirely. "Why?" "Because the fire won't be enough tonight, and we're low on wood." He didn't argue. just stood, slow, like every movement cost him something. I wrapped him in the thickest cloak I had, tied it at his neck, then tucked the ends into his belt. It made him look smaller, more breakable. I opened the door. The cold slapped me across the teeth. There was no frost this time, just raw air, dry and vicious, the kind that pulled at your lips and made your nose bleed if you stood still too long. We walked quick through the path, past shuttered doors and smokeless chimneys. No one tended their fires today. They were saving wood, waiting for the huddle. Everyone was. The village hall was the only place big enough to hold us all, not comfortably, but tightly. That was the point. They called it a council, but there were no votes, no speeches, no new plans. The huddle law wasn't about governance, it was about warmth. The idea was simple: pack as many bodies into one space as possible and steal the heat off each other's backs. We did it every 7 days, or sooner if the wind turned wrong. I knocked twice at the heavy door, heard voices behind it, then silence. Footsteps. The bolt scraped back. The door opened just enough to show Mira's face. She looked at me, then down at the boy, then back at me. They said you hadn't done your frost shift. And yet, she said, I was never called. Everyone's called. I've been patching my walls, digging heat pits, cooking for 2. She didn't move. The wind clawed at my back. Mira, I said. She stepped aside, slowly. Inside, the air was thick with breath. Bodies stood shoulder to shoulder in tight rows. No one was sitting. No one smiled. The windows were blocked with hay bales. The hearth burned in the centre, low and steady. But it wasn't the fire that warmed the room. It was us. Dozens of villagers pressed close, wool to wool, elbow to arm, no gaps. That was the rule. No air between, no waste. The boy and I took our place along the back wall, close enough to a family I didn't know well. The mother gave me a small nod. The father didn't look. I felt the hesitation in their posture, the small lean away, the pull of their child closer to the middle. I ignored it. The warmth seeped in slow, like soaking into a cloth. Hanel stood by the hearth, arms crossed. We're missing 4, he said. Someone murmured a name, then another. No one answered. No one volunteered to check. That was how it worked. If you didn't show, you weren't questioned. But you also weren't kept warm the next time. Coals will be passed before we leave, Hanel said. 1 for each household. No repeats. If you lose yours, you wait until the next burn. Mira moved along the edge of the wall, handing out clay pots with lids. The boy clutched ours like it was gold. Don't drop it, I told him. I won't. The talking died down. No one wanted to waste breath. And then we stood, and stood, and stood. The huddle wasn't for comfort. It was for equilibrium. Stay just long enough to bank body heat in your skin, then go before the sweat cooled and turned against you. An hour passed, maybe more. A child began to cry near the centre, not loud, just a soft, tired wail. The mother shifted, trying to shush him without pulling him into the wind path. Another rule: don't break formation, not even for your own. I saw Elric's widow. She was near the front, pale. Her hand shook when she passed the coal pot to the man beside her. I wondered if she'd eaten that day. I wondered how many of us had. The fire hissed as someone added a log. Then the bolt lifted again. They're full, someone whispered. The door opened and the wind rushed in, hitting the back of the room like a hammer. The boy shuddered against me. 1 row at a time, Hanel said. We left in silence. Outside it was colder than before, but I didn't feel it. Not yet. That was the point. Huddle warmth stayed with you for a while. A buffer. A delay. It gave you time to get back home before your bones remembered the truth. We made it to the house and stepped inside. The boy sat near the fire. I unwrapped him slowly, peeled the cloak back. His cheeks were flushed, eyes clearer. He looked better. You feel it? I asked. He nodded. The clay coal pot still burned, faint and red. I tipped the coals into the hearth, fed them 2 sticks. Toe. He flame caught, weak but alive. I leaned against the wall. The huddle had done its job. But I'd felt the delay at the door, the way Mira had waited. I'd seen it before, in harvest, in famine, in plague. People didn't close doors in anger, they closed them in fear. That night I laid close to the boy, closer than usual. Not for warmth, but for proof that someone still wanted me near. I let her in tonight. Her warmth is realer than the prayers I muttered last night. The floor steams, so does my shame. But I live. I fought the idea longer than I should have. It started as a passing thought, back when the nights first turned cruel. The wind clawed through the thatch, and I curled tight in the hollow beside the hearth, watching my breath rise in clouds. The cow was outside, always outside, even when I moved the coop in, even when the fire burned too fast and the coal ran low, even when I heard her lowing in the dark, slow, steady, resentful. I kept the barn sealed and told myself that some lines still mattered. But lines don't hold in winter. They sink beneath snowdrifts and rot like everything else. So I broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet and simple. A morning colder than the last, a house too quiet, fire too low, and a thought that wouldn't leave me. She's warmer than wood. The boy stayed curled in the bedding hollow. I wrapped myself in wool and stepped outside. The barn door was stiff, the hinges crusted. I pushed hard. Frost cracked off like glass. She turned when she saw me. No greeting, just breath, slow, thick, white. Her coat looked dull, damp from the snowmelt that had crept inside. She didn't move at first, just stared. "I need you," I told her. It sounded more pathetic out loud than it had in my head. She snorted, shifted her weight and stepped forward. I led her with rope, slow and steady. The house wasn't made for her. The doorframe scraped her flanks as she came through. Her hooves slid once on the earthen floor, but she didn't resist. She understood, same as I did, what this was. I laid straw in the back corner, piled it thick, mixed with dry moss. Then I built a partition out of 2 old crates and a spare board. Not enough to keep her penned, just enough to define the space. The warmth filled the room within minutes, not heat like fire, not sharp and biting, but round, slow, dense, the kind that sinks into your chest and stays. The boy sat up, rubbed his eyes. "You brought her in." I did. "Why now?" "Because we either do this, or we stop waking up." He didn't say anything after that. I stoked the fire. It caught faster than usual. The air held heat better now, thicker with body warmth. The smoke rose smoother through the reed chimney, less fighting to escape, more cooperation. She lay down near the wall and closed her eyes. I thought of all the things people would say, the jokes, the gossip, the old stories about those too poor or too strange to keep the animals where they belonged. But the floor steamed where she lay, and so did I. The shame crept in slowly, a whisper at the back of my mind, not loud, just present. But I let it sit there, let it smoulder with the rest of the things I no longer had time to explain away. Later that day, I noticed the boy staying closer to her than to me. He sat with his back against her flank, legs stretched toward the fire. He didn't speak, just leaned in, eyes half closed, as if her heartbeat made him braver. I didn't interrupt. I fetched water from the frozen barrel. Took longer than it should. The surface was a single block. I had to hammer a hole with the butt of the axe. Each swing echoed through the field like a warning. When I came back inside, the air was warmer still. Sweat beaded under my arms. The smell of cow was everywhere, thick and grassy, with a hint of ammonia. But I didn't flinch. Smell was nothing. Not when you could feel your fingers again. I boiled stew with the last marrow bone. The pot hissed on the stones. The cow snorted when I dropped in the dried onion skins. She knew the smell of food. She leaned her head toward the hearth and watched. I gave her a crust. She chewed slow, with purpose. I laughed, once, not loud. The boy smiled. That night, I didn't put up the partition. She chose her corner and stayed there, belly rising and falling like a tide. The boy rolled close. I stayed by the fire. When I lay down, I pulled the blanket just to my chin and stared at the ceiling. The roof didn't seem as low anymore. The shadows didn't stretch as far. I muttered a prayer, not out of habit, not for peace, just to have something to say in a room that suddenly felt full. She shifted once during the night, snorted, rolled onto her side. The floor steamed again, warmth rising off her like breath, and I slept. 5 layers of unwashed wool. I wear my own stink like armor. It's not the cold that drives you mad, it's the itch that comes with surviving it. The 5th layer went on stiff. Not stiff from cold, but from wear, sweat, and 1,000 other things I hadn't washed off in weeks. Wool keeps you alive, but it doesn't forgive. It holds every breath, every drop, every bad dream soaked through your back in the night. I wrapped the belt twice around my waist and pulled until I couldn't feel my ribs expand. That's how I knew it would hold. That's how I knew I'd stay warm, for a while at least. The air outside had stopped pretending. The wind wasn't gusting anymore. It was settled now, still, that terrifying stillness that only comes when the cold is too thick to move. Inside I paced, 2 steps to the hearth, turn, 2 steps to the wall, turn again. The floor groaned with each pass, not from weakness, just exhaustion. The cow snorted behind me, shifting in her corner. She liked the heat, even if she didn't understand the cost. I'd burned through 1/3 of the wood already that week. At this rate, I'd be down to bark and stool legs before the month ended. The boy scratched his arms through the sleeve of his tunic. Not subtle, deep, hard scratching, the kind that leaves lines. "Stop that," I said. "It itches." "I know." He looked at me, eyes wide and red from lack of sleep. "Do you ever stop itching?" "No." He went back to scratching. "The wool itches worse the longer it's worn, and we all wear it long. No one dares wash their clothes now. If they freeze before they dry, they're ruined, and no one's got the fire to spare for boiling, so we layer. We stink. We press cloth to skin until we feel more wool than human. And the itch, it crawls. Behind the knees, under the armpits, across the back of your neck, like a whisper you can't shake. Some people tear at themselves. I've seen it. Deep gouges down the arms. Bloody tracks under sleeves. One man last year rubbed his shoulders raw with sand just to make the itching stop. I pace faster, trying not to scratch, trying not to think. The boy gives up and reaches into his sleeve, dragging a nail hard against his forearm. Blood. I grab his hand. Enough. He pulls away, ashamed. I toss him the beeswax salve from the shelf. Rub it on, thin. He does. Careful this time. Then he glares at his sleeves like they betrayed him. I hate these clothes. You're alive in them. That's not enough. It will be. The truth is, I hate mine too. Each layer is a prison, a weight, but I won't take them off, not for anything. I go outside. The cold hits like a wall. Wool buys time, but not much. You have to move, and move fast. I head to the fence line. The snares I set yesterday might have caught something, maybe. I bend low near the first post. Nothing. Second, nothing. Third, a rabbit, half frozen, still alive, barely. It blinks at me, slow, as I reach for it. Its breath curls faintly in the air. I twist its neck fast. I can't afford to let it suffer, or run. Back inside, I toss it on the board. The boy looks up. Still warm? For a moment. We dress it together. Quick. Practiced. The meat goes into the stew pot with a carrot I'd buried in the straw bin to keep from freezing. Steam fills the room, dampens the air. That's when the itch gets worse. Moisture makes the wool contract. It tightens around your arms, your chest like a snake. The fibers catch skin already raw. Dig in, refuse to let go. I grip the edge of the table, focus, breathe. Don't scratch, but my shoulders twitch, my neck burns. The boy's rubbing again, this time under the knee. His fingers come back red. I hand him a fresh wrap. Bind it tight. He obeys. We eat in silence. Steam rises from the stew, warming our faces, tricking us into thinking the day isn't as bad as it is. But it is. It always is. Later, after the fire has dropped low and the cow has settled, I strip off 2 layers. Just 2. Enough to breathe. Enough to stop the madness crawling across my back. The air hits my skin like a slap. I grit my teeth. Scratch once, just once, then force my hands into the basin of snowmelt and scrub. No soap, just snow. It burns, but it's clean in its own way. The boy watches me. Can I? No, I say, not tonight. He looks down. I'm sorry. You will be if you freeze. He nods. I dry my arms by the fire and pull the wool back on before they lose heat. It's worse after, always worse. The skin tingles, the fabric clings, but I endure, because I'm still breathing, because the only thing worse than the itch of wool is the silence that follows when you stop hearing it. He measures the space between us in bed, less than a hand's width, and still too much. Even warmth has rules. Break them, and you freeze alone. They came just after sundown. No knock. Just the creak of the latch and the shove of the door opening wider than I'd left it. Cold followed them in, dragging behind their cloaks like a third visitor. 2 men, one I knew, Arlo, a broad-shouldered man who kept bees in the spring and teeth bared in winter. The other I only knew by the stick he carried. He held it like a weapon, though it wasn't one. A carved rod, smooth with wear, notched at the end. A ruler of sorts, though no one called it that, just the stick. The boy stiffened at the sight of them. The cow lifted her head, snorted once, then laid back down. I stood between the men and the hearth. You didn't send word, I said. You were on the list, Arlo replied. No one told me. Doesn't matter now. The man with the stick didn't speak. He just nodded toward the bedding. How many sleep here? He asked. 2. You and the boy? I nodded. He walked past me, moving with that careful, bored efficiency of someone who didn't want to be doing this, but would. He knelt beside the bedding hollow and placed the stick across it, end to end, pressing it into the blankets. He waited. Where do you lie? He asked. Closest to the hearth. And the boy? Against the wall. He turned the stick sideways, measured the space between where our bodies would fall, tilted his head, moved the stick again. Too wide. We share a blanket. It bunches. It bunches because you let it. He stood. You know the rule. I did. Everyone did. In winter, warmth isn't a comfort, it's a resource, a shared commodity. Body heat is measured, traded, stored, and the distance between 2 bodies is the difference between surviving the night and not. The law wasn't written, but it was enforced. No more than a hand. There's width of air between sleepers, no gaps, no waste. He stepped back and pointed to the boy. Lift your arm. The boy hesitated. Now, I nodded, and he obeyed. The man placed the stick between his ribs and the blanket's edge, shook his head. Too much space. Arlo shifted. That's a warning, he said. 1 more, and you lose your shift coals next round. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. What could I say? We shift in our sleep. The blanket slips. He twitches when he dreams. None of it mattered. Excuses didn't burn wood. The man with the stick tucked it beneath his cloak and turned toward the door. You're lucky, he said. Why? Others were colder than you last night. They won't get warnings. Then they were gone. The silence they left was worse than the cold they brought in. The boy didn't speak. He pulled the blanket up and sat with his knees tucked against his chest. I don't like them, he whispered. Neither do I. Why do we let them in? Because if we don't, Someone else lets them in harder. I sat beside him, not close, not yet. The cow shifted in her sleep, breath steaming in the low light. I checked the hearth. The flame was steady, but low. I fed it a dry twig, then another. I kept thinking about that stick, the notches, the coldness of it. Who carved it? Who decided the exact space a body could take? Who measured warmth in inches and shame? I had once thought warmth was something you earned. That if you worked hard enough, braced your walls, dug your hearth low, you'd be spared. Now I knew better. Warmth was a number, a policy, a space on a ledger kept by people with nothing better to do than count your failures in frostbite and firewood. That night, I lay closer to the boy, pressed side to side, shoulder to shoulder. He didn't move away. Neither did I. We lay still, listening to each other breathe, trying to make it sound natural. The blanket shifted with us, and I tucked it tight. It wasn't comfort. It was currency. I slept badly, not because I was cold, but because I was afraid of what the stick would find next. We stack ourselves like logs, curled and crooked. There's no comfort, only calculation. Who needs the warmth most tonight? The night before had taken more than it gave. The boy slept straight through, pressed close to me the way the rule demanded, no more than a breath's space between us. But sleep didn't come easy, not when every inch of your skin is aware of how much heat it's losing, not when your ribs remember the shape of a stick. By dawn, my left leg had gone numb. I shifted just enough to let the blood crawl back, slow and tingling. I watched the shadows from the fire dance across the ceiling while the rest of the room held its breath. The cow twitched in her corner, twitching through some half-dream I wouldn't dare guess. She was the only one of us who looked at peace. I envied her. When the boy finally stirred, he whispered, "Are we still being measured?" "Always," I said. He didn't ask by whom. We ate what was left of the broth, barely a bowl between us. No meat, just water tinged with marrow and root. It filled the space in our stomachs, if not the need. I split the last of the crust. The inside had gone gummy, but it chewed like bread. By midday, I knew the wood wouldn't last. What I had stacked near the hearth the night before was enough for 2 fires, 3 if I stretched the twigs with bark, not enough to make it through another week of this, not with 2 mouths, and a cow. I bundled up 5 layers, the outer one crusted with soot and salt from the sweat that dried days ago. The boy looked up from where he was packing straw against the window cloth. "Are you going to trade?" "I'm going to think about it." That was true. I didn't know if I had enough to offer anymore. There's only so many times you can bring a rabbit or half a loaf before people start asking what else you've got hidden. I stepped out and walked the long path toward the mill, old, broken, but still a place people gathered. It was there I found Mira, seated on a stump near a fading fire. Her hair was tied up in a scarf, her cheeks raw from windburn. She had 2 bundles of kindling at her feet. She saw me and raised an eyebrow. "Need something? Wood? Got trade?" I pulled the cloth from my pocket. Inside, 2 eggs, from the day before, my last. Her mouth tightened. "Where'd you get them?" "You know where. People talk. They always do." She took the eggs, held them up to the light, turned them slowly. "They're good," she said, "but not enough for both bundles." I figured. She gave me one and handed the eggs to her son, who waited behind the mill door like a shadow. On the way home, I thought about asking for more, but I didn't. You don't push when you've already taken more than you're owed. When I returned, the boy had redressed the bedding hollow. 3 layers of straw, then wool, then the cloth lining from the cow's old feed bin. "I put the thickest near the wall," he said. "Why?" "It's coldest there." He was right. I added the kindling to the hearth, enough to make it glow through the night if we stayed close, if we didn't waste. That evening I showed him how to nest properly. Lie on your side, I said. Pull your knees to your stomach. Keep your hands between your thighs, not near your face. That's where the heat stays longest. He mimicked me. Now shift back toward me. Not too far, not too fast. He moved. That's good. I draped the blanket over us both. This isn't for sleep, I told him. This is for war. He didn't speak, but I saw him nod. We lay there, curled and crooked, stacked like logs. My back bent to match the curve of his, my arm across his shoulder. No comfort. Just geometry. A position designed not for dreams, but for efficiency, for conservation, for survival. I stayed awake longer than he did. Long enough to feel my own heartbeat slow, long enough to count the drops of meltwater running down the inside of the chimney pipe. It was the quiet that got to me most, the kind of silence where even breath seems like noise. But the warmth built slowly, between us, among the layers, across the stones of the hearth. The cow's breath misted in the dark. Her eyes half shut, legs folded beneath her bulk. She looked like she'd always been there. And maybe she had. In places like this, in winters like these, animals outlive stories, outlive pride, outlive rules. That night, I didn't dream. I just slept. Not because I was tired, but because I finally understood that warmth isn't something you feel, it's something you do. And you'd better do it right. Straw, waste, and ash, the floor composts beneath us. Each step I take is warm filth. Each breath is survival. It started with a smell. Not sharp, like rot, not the stench of something dead, just rich, thick, earthy, heavy in the throat. I noticed it when I bent down to stir the fire and felt a gust of heat roll upward, not from the flame, but from the floor. I pressed my palm to the dirt. It was warm, not dry, not clean, but alive in its own way. A layer of old straw, spilled broth, soot, manure from the cow's first night inside, all of it pressed together into a low, slow burn beneath our feet. I didn't know what to call it then. Later, I remembered a word someone once used at harvest. Compost. Not waste. Fuel. I rose slowly, staring at the packed-down mix we called a floor. It hadn't been swept in weeks. It wasn't meant to be. Every spill, every crumb, every ash that fell from the hearth had a purpose now. The boy stepped near the bedding hollow and froze. "It's hot," he said. "Not hot, just warm." "Is that bad?" I didn't answer right away. I went to the bucket beside the door and dipped a ladle in. The water was still liquid. That shouldn't have been possible. I carried the ladle to the centre of the room and spilled a few drops on the floorboards near the cow's sleeping mat. They didn't freeze. Not right away. We were standing on a furnace, one made from everything we'd cast off. I crouched again, fingers digging into the edges of the straw pack. It crumbled under my touch, but it held heat, real heat. I reached deeper. The lowest layer was damp, almost sticky. The cow watched me, eyes half-lidded, chewing something old. Her waste had soaked into the straw days ago, mixing with spilled stew, melted fat, boot-tracked mud. And together it was doing what the fire couldn't. I stood, wiping my hands on my coat. The boy raised an eyebrow. "It's the rot," I said. "It's key. Keeping us alive." He looked down at his bare toes, then lifted them quickly off the floor. "You sure that's safe?" "No." He went to the bench and wrapped his feet in cloth. I paced the floor, tracing the warmest paths, where the straw was thickest, where the moisture lingered, where the breakdown had begun. Decay wasn't an accident. It was working. I added another layer of straw, raked it flat with a stick, pressed it with my boots. The cow shifted and farted once, long and loud. I didn't flinch. She was part of it now. We all were. I went to the hearth and scooped the ash from the edge of the stones. Instead of throwing it out, I sprinkled it into the straw near the sleeping area, just a dusting, enough to bind the moisture and deepen the heat. The boy watched in silence. "You're feeding the floor," he said. "I am. Is that normal?" "Nothing's normal in winter." By midday, the warmth had spread to the wall's edge. The boy stepped barefoot into the center of the room. "I can feel it," he whispered. "Don't stand too long. It's damp underneath. Could make you sick." He stepped back. I added dry moss to the cow's corner, mixing it with her hay, pressing it flat. She grunted and shifted again. That afternoon, I went outside to gather more straw. The cold bit hard this time, worse than yesterday. My hands went stiff even through the gloves. The sky was flat and grey, pressed low against the trees. A storm was coming, the kind that lingered for days. I moved fast, gathering the driest bundles from the shed, breaking them loose with the back of the axe. My arms ached from the effort, but I didn't stop. Inside, the boy had peeled back the sleeping cloth to check the heat again. "It's even warmer," he said. "It will be tonight." I scattered fresh straw across the floor, careful to layer it in the patterns I'd seen in the barn as a child, thick in the centre, thinner at the edges. Let the breakdown happen where it could help, not where it could spread sickness. Later I cooked with the stones buried deep in the hearth. I laid them into the compost, floor, let the heat rise through. It worked. The stew cooked slow but steady, without smoke, without flame, just warmth, pulled from rot. I served the boy a bowl and sat with mine beside the hearth. He ate in silence, chewing slow. Then he said, "Do you think anyone else knows?" "Knows what?" "That we can live like this, on what we throw away." I looked at him. "No," I said. "Most people are too proud." He nodded, but I saw something shift in his eyes. That night we lay down in the hollow. The floor was warm beneath us. The fire barely cracked. But we didn't shiver. For the first time in days, we didn't chase heat. It came up from beneath us, carrying every failure we'd spilled onto the ground and turning it into something useful. I closed my eyes. There was rot under my back and life in my lungs. I drink from the gutter. I forgot to store water and now my teeth rattle from ice. The snow tastes like soot. It tastes like failure, but it's wet, and that's what matters. I knew the bucket was empty before I lifted the lid. The weight was wrong, too light. The sound when I tapped the wood, hollow, bone dry. I stared at it a moment, willing water into it like a fool. Nothing came. Then I remembered. I'd meant to fill it yesterday, after I'd finished with the straw, after the composting layer, after the stew, but the warmth had distracted me. I'd gotten used to comfort, just for one day, and now the price had arrived. The boy coughed in his sleep, dry and sharp. I didn't need a physician to tell me what came next if I didn't find water. I pulled on my boots. They were stiff from the cold. The left one cracked across the heel. Outside, the snow had thickened. The storm hadn't fallen yet, but it waited overhead, pressed in low clouds and a sky the colour of wet ash. The trees didn't move. The air didn't move. I crossed the yard to the gutter. It had iced over. A rim of snow clung to the lip of the wood trough, where the roof's melt used to run. Not anymore. Not since the frost took hold. But snow had gathered in the bend, filthy, crusted with soot from weeks of smoke and kitchen fire. I didn't think. I just bent and scooped a handful into my mouth. It burned. My teeth screamed and my tongue went numb. The grit hit first. Ash, dirt, things I didn't name. Then the wet. Cold, yes, but wet. I forced myself to chew. Let the snow melt between clenched molars. It wasn't good, but it was water. I filled the bucket by hand. No ladle, no scoop, just fistfuls of snow, pressed down until the sides overflowed with slush. My fingers went red, then white, then nothing. I couldn't feel the skin anymore by the time I finished. Back inside, the heat hit me like a wall. The cow snorted, eyes half-lidded in her corner. The boy was sitting up now, blanket around his shoulders, watching me. "I forgot the water," I said. He didn't answer. I poured the snow into the iron pot and set it on the stones. It hissed against the heat, turned cloudy as it melted. When it was half liquid, half slush, I dipped a cup and handed it to the boy. He drank without blinking, even as his teeth clicked from the cold. "Don't swallow fast," I warned. "I won't." The snow tasted like soot. It tasted like every mistake I'd made that week, but it was wet, and that's all that mattered. I drank next, let it sit in my mouth, let it warm just enough to slide down. It wasn't enough, never was, but it bought us time. I set the bucket by the hearth to melt fully, then pressed my hands into a rag to try and bring feeling back. I peeled off the gloves and stared at my palms, blistered, red, skin cracking near the knuckles. A fingernail had gone black on the left hand. I didn't remember when that happened. The boy said, "You always go first." "What?" "With food, with water, even when it's bad." "That's the rule," I said. "Why?" "Because if it kills me, you're warned." He was quiet a moment. Then, "That's not fair." "No, it's not." The cow shifted. Her tail slapped the wall. The floor steamed faintly under her. I stood and added more snow to the bucket, shook the flakes from my sleeves. I knew it wouldn't last long. 1 bucket, 1 day. 2, if we rationed every sip and prayed we didn't cough too hard. I thought about the old well by the chapel. It was deeper, colder, maybe still clear. But I also thought about the path to get there, open field, no cover, and nothing between me and the wind if it turned sudden. Not today. I went back to the gutter and pulled down the cloth I'd hung to catch melt in early autumn. It was stiff now, folded it into a funnel and packed snow inside. Brought that in too. Let it hang by the fire, drip slow into the basin. A trickle, at best, but better than nothing. Everything in winter is better than nothing. That afternoon we drank warm water, snow melted and reheated with a sliver of root steeped in it, just to kill the taste. The boy didn't complain, neither did I. Later, I took one last scoop from the gutter. It tasted like failure, but failure can keep you alive if it's wet. 1 blast means the fire's dying, 2 means someone already has. I run barefoot across frozen mud. The child in house 6 isn't crying anymore. The horn woke me, sharp, low, too fast. It cut through the night like a blade drawn across the grain of the world. Not the long, rising tone of a warning, but a short one. 1 blast. I sat up. The boy stirred beside me, mouth open but silent. The second blast followed, short, clipped, certain. Not a call for help, a call for the rest of us to come look. The fire was still burning low in the hearth, just enough for the coals to glow. The cow stirred once in the corner and let out a soft, confused grunt. I didn't wait for a third blast. I pulled on my boots, untied, loose, and threw the cloak around my shoulders. The air inside the house was warmer than it had any right to be, and I hated how much I noticed the difference when I opened the door. The cold hit like punishment. Outside, the moon was nowhere. The sky hung low, clouded with black, thick with the threat of snow that hadn't fallen yet, but would. I ran, barefoot in spirit. My soles might as well have been exposed. The boots were too thin, the ground too sharp. Frozen ruts of churned mud pressed into the path like knives. I dodged the patches I could. The rest tore into me. House 6 stood half collapsed at the edge of the path near the frozen ditch where the wind always pooled. I could hear shouting inside. I didn't knock. The door swung wide when I pushed it, brittle hinges groaning like they were ready to snap. Mira was already there, crouched beside the hearth. Her hair was damp, face pale. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper. "Where is she?" I asked. She didn't answer. I stepped farther in. The hearth was dead, cold. A pot still hung above it, full of nothing but smoke and ice. I saw the child in the corner. She wasn't crying. Her face was blue at the edges, her mouth slack, her eyes open just slightly, staring at something no longer in the room. The mother knelt beside her, not touching, just kneeling, mouth open like she might speak, but hadn't yet. I felt my stomach hollow. Mira rose, slow. "She was coughing last night," she said. "We told her to come to the huddle. She said no, said she'd make do. She didn't." "No," Mira whispered. "She didn't." The horn lay on the ground, discarded near the mother's feet. That explained the blasts. 1 to warn, 2 to mourn. I didn't ask why they waited for the second. Maybe they hadn't wanted to believe it. Maybe they'd hoped someone else would come first, take the decision from them. I knelt and reached for the child's wrist. Cold, brittle, the sort of cold that doesn't thaw. "I'll stoke the fire," I said. Mira nodded, but didn't move. I stripped the hearth, cleared out the frozen ash, and built a small pyramid from what little kindling I found in the corner. Dry enough, barely. I struck the flint. It caught on the third try. The fire took slow, licking the edges of the straw. I added bark, then wood. The light spread across the walls like a reluctant sunrise. The mother still hadn't spoken. I touched her shoulder. She flinched, but didn't turn. "You should sit by the fire," I said. She didn't. I stood and nodded at Mira. "I'll bring coal," I said. "I'll stay." I ran back to my house. The boy was still awake, sitting up in the bedding hollow. "I heard it," he said. "I know." "Is she?" "Yes." He looked down at his feet, said nothing. I knelt beside the hearth and pulled the ember jar from the stones, one I kept buried in the ash for just this kind of thing. I filled it with 2 glowing coals and sealed the top with a lid packed in wet cloth. Then I ran back. By the time I arrived, the fire was stronger. Mira sat by it, arms around her knees. The mother hadn't moved. I placed the coals in the hearth, fed them more wood, enough to keep them till morning. "We'll need to send for the mark," Mira said. The mark, the sigil they'd paint on the lintel, the sign that death had passed through. Not a curse, just a warning, a signal for those who track the deaths, who made the tallies. "They'll come tomorrow," I said. Mira stood. "We should go." The mother didn't stir. We stepped outside. The air had thickened, snow falling now in slow, lazy flakes that stuck to our hair and lashes. Mira whispered, "Do you think she was the first?" I looked at her. "She won't be the last." She nodded. We walked in silence, back toward our houses, back toward warmth and the guilt that comes with keeping it. Inside, the boy had lit Ted. He hearth again. He'd done it well. I sat beside him, cloak still dusted with snow. He asked, "Do they keep the body in the house?" "Until the ground softens." He nodded like that made sense. Then he asked, "How do we know when it's our turn?" "We don't." He pulled the blanket over his knees. I watched the fire. 1 blast means the fire's dying. 2 means someone already has. And now I listen harder than ever before. The pottage turns bitter. We eat it anyway. Rot doesn't stop us anymore. Hunger makes everything taste like forgiveness. The smell hit me first. Not strong, not enough to gag, but sharp, faintly sour, like something once alive turning towards something else, a whiff of wrongness rising with the steam. The pottage simmered low on the hearthstone, thick with barley, dry beans, and a stub of onion so soft I hadn't needed to chop it, just crushed it with the flat of my knife. I had added a pinch of dried herbs, more for memory than flavour. I stirred the pot and leaned in. It had turned. I tasted it anyway. 1 sip, thin, bitter. the kind of bitterness that curled the tongue and lingered behind the teeth. I waited for the gag. It didn't come. My stomach didn't protest. My body knew better. I turned to the boy. It's ready. He stood slowly from his spot near the cow, rubbing his hands together. His cheeks were flushed, but not from warmth. We hadn't eaten since dawn, and even that had been more meltwater than food. He took the bowl without a word and sat near the hearth. He didn't ask if it was safe, didn't ask if it was spoiled, just dipped a crust in and started chewing. I poured a bowl for myself and sat beside him. The first spoonful made me wince. The second went down easier. By the third, it almost tasted like food. That's the trick of winter. It trains you to forget. Teaches your mouth to lie to your stomach and your stomach to lie to your soul. The pottage was half rot and half prayer. And still we ate it like it was owed to us. I think it was the beans, I said. The boy kept chewing. They've been stored too long, absorbed something from the damp. Still, he didn't stop. It's fine, he said. And it was, or at least it was enough. I swallowed another mouthful. This one hit the edge of bile, just for a moment, then passed. The cow snorted, standing up and shaking hat. I from her back. She moved toward the door, then stopped, then turned a circle and sat again. Even she looked hungry. I scraped the bottom of the pot for what little had thickened at the edge, scooped the charred scrap into a cup and poured a little water over it, carried it to her. She sniffed, then slurped it slowly, one black tongue dragging the side of the cup. The boy wiped his mouth with his sleeve. That was the worst one, he said. It was still food. He nodded. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind against the walls, the slow drip of snow melting through the chimney funnel. Then the boy spoke again. Why do you call it pottage? That's what it is. It's not stew. Stew needs meat, broth, something richer. Pottage is just what we have, boiled long enough to forget what it was. He seemed to think about that. So it lies in a bowl, something like that. Later I stirred what little was left and poured it into a cloth-wrapped crock. It would keep one more night. After that, the rot would win. I watched the boy curl beneath the blanket. He didn't ask for more. I didn't offer. Instead, I went to the shelf and took down the jar of dried leeks, only a handful left, brittle, nearly tasteless, but not spoiled, not yet. I crumbled one into my palm, held it to my nose, nothing. Then I ate it, dry, sharp, but clean. It reminded me of the last time food had flavour. Weeks ago, maybe more. The last rabbit had gone into a pot with mustard seed and vinegar. I remembered that meal. We'd eaten slow, not because we were full, but because it tasted like something. Now everything tasted like need. That night I dreamed of honey, thick gold, poured over rye bread still warm from the oven. I woke before the first bite. The cow was chewing in her sleep. The boy had kicked off his blanket. I tucked it back over him, slowly. Then I added 2 twigs to the fire and stirred the embers with the poker. The pot still sat near the edge of the stone, one last scrape in the bottom. I took it with my finger, warm, bitter, but it filled the space. And winter didn't care about flavour. I eat first. If I don't fall sick, the rest will follow. They watch me chew. I pretend it doesn't burn on the way down. The frost on the inside of the door had thickened overnight, creeping like moss across the frame. I cracked it with my knuckles before opening it, just a thin split to let in the morning grey. The wind had gone silent again. That kind of silence never lasted. The cow had been restless through the night, shifting in her corner, stamping once every hour like clockwork. She wanted more hay, but I was down to the sweepings, the pieces too small to count, the kind you brush away when you have something better. She'd eat it anyway. I didn't speak to the boy at first. He was still asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't blame him. There wasn't much to wake for. I boiled snow in the pot again, scraping the last of the bean paste from the jar. The smell made my stomach tighten, sharp, slightly sweet, a bad sign. It had begun to turn. I stirred it into the water anyway, watching the swirl of grey and yellow rise like something once alive. "You're not going to eat that," the boy said, sitting up. "I am," I said. He didn't argue. We both knew what came next. It was the same rule we followed for 3 weeks now. I ate first. If I lived, he'd eat later. I ladled the soup, if that's what it could still be called, into the wooden bowl and held it steady with both hands. It burned through the sides. Not hot, just wrong. I brought it to my mouth. It smelled like rot trying to hide behind salt. I took a sip. The first taste didn't register. My tongue recoiled before I could decide what was there. My body flinched, but I swallowed anyway. A mistake, if it was one, had already happened. The boy watched without blinking. I chewed the thicker bits, fibres that used to be beans, bits of sprout, something that might have been garlic skin, though I hadn't seen a clove in 2 months. It stuck in my throat. I forced it down. He still watched. "I'll wait," he said. "You should." I finished the bowl. Didn't rush, didn't breathe too hard, just moved through the ritual. Bit, chewed, swallowed. Afterward, I licked the inside of the bowl with a clean finger and set it on the hearth to dry. Then I stood and waited. Not for anything specific, just the passage of time. If it was going to come back up, it would have already. 10 minutes passed. My stomach ached, but not in a new way. The boy stirred the pot. "I'll try it," he said. "No, I want to." "Not yet." He looked at the fire instead. Later, after I'd walked the perimeter outside and checked the trap lines, nothing but a broken snare and fox prints, I came back to find the boy kneeling by the hearth, the ladle in his hand. He looked up. "Still alive?" "Still here." He dipped a scoop and sipped, fast, no hesitation. He flinched once, swallowed, then wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "It's bad," he said. "But it's food, I guess." He ate the rest, not because he trusted it, but because he trusted me. That's what the fool's turn is. You eat first, you suffer first, you die first if you're wrong, and if you're right, no one thanks you, they just follow your lead. That afternoon, my stomach cramped once, sharp near the navel, then passed. A warning, maybe, or nothing. The boy lay near the cow, arm across her flank. She didn't flinch. The room smelled like vinegar and smoke, the kind of smoke that never leaves your clothes, no matter how long you air them out in spring, if spring ever came. By evening, I was hungry again. The boy offered me what was left of the pot. I took it. A fool twice over, but a fool still breathing. Fat and pine mixed thick, smeared over wool until the wind slides off me like guilt. It works, for now, until it doesn't. I don't remember where I first heard about it. The sap recipe. Some old farmer's trick passed from someone who'd lasted through one too many winters, a mixture that turns wool into armour, a skin of smoke, pine and fat that the wind struggles to chew through. At first I thought it was nonsense. Then my second coat stiffened from frost and stayed stiff for 3 days. When I bent it over my knee to loosen it, it cracked like bark. That was the morning I decided to try it. I started with lard, what was left from the sheep bone scraps I'd boiled down 2 weeks ago. Rancid, mostly. Greasy, but it still moved when I heated it. Next, I shaved curls of pine bark into the pot. Not just needles. Bark. You have to crush it to get the sap to bleed. I mashed the pieces with the flat of my blade until it stuck to the metal, like honey mixed with dirt. The boy watched from his seat by the cow. "That's for eating?" "No," I said. "Then why are you cooking it?" "Because I want to walk outside without my skin cracking." He nodded, though I could see he didn't quite understand. When the sap thickened into a glue, I added a twist of moss soaked in melt water, just enough to thin it. Then I let it cool until it stopped bubbling but still moved when stirred. The smell was awful, not sharp, just heavy, like burned wood and old skin. The cow sneezed. I waved the smoke away and dipped a scrap of wool into the mixture. It went in soft, came out like parchment. I wrung it out, slapped it over the back of a stool and let it dry. The air around it shimmered faintly from the heat. 2 hours later, it was ready. I peeled the cloth free, wrapped it around my arm, and stepped outside. The wind hit me like it always did, blunt, searching, hungry. But where the sap-covered wool touched skin, it slid, skidded past like fingers on polished wood. It worked, not like fire, not like shelter, but enough to make a difference, enough to steal back minutes from the cold, and in a winter like this, minutes were gold. I went back inside and dunked the rest of my outer coat into the pot. It took the sap like it was built for it, soaked deep, stained dark. I hung it on a crossbeam, steam rising from the shoulders. The boy crept closer. Will it smell like that? Always. He wrinkled his nose. I'll try to ignore it. I didn't offer to make one for him. Not yet. He was still smaller than the coat, and I needed to know if the recipe failed before I shared it. That night, when the wind picked up, I stepped outside again, full wrapped, gloved, hood drawn low. The coat moved like bark now, rigid at the edges, but I didn't shiver. Not once. I paced the coop, checked the boards, scattered a handful of crushed grain into the corners. The chickens stirred, but didn't rise. At the trap line, I found a rat frozen in place, teeth bared, legs mid-step, like death had caught it between motions. I kicked it loose and stuffed it into the cloth sack at my hip. Meat was meat. The boy didn't ask where it came from anymore. Back inside, I peeled the coat off. My arms steamed, not sweat, just relief. The boy was already spooning thin broth into 2 bowls. "You didn't shake," he said. "No." "Then we'll both wear it." I nodded. I dipped the rest of the cloth strips into the cooling pot and let them soak. By morning, they'd be stiff and ready. I scraped the hardened sap from the sides of the pot and saved it in a wax cloth, just in case I needed to reheat and seal cracks later. The cow sniffed at one of the coated rags and turned away, uninterested, smart beast. The boy curled against her and closed his eyes. Later I lay in the hollow with the coat near my head. It stank, pine, fat, ash, but it radiated something else, certainty. It worked, for now, until it didn't. But tonight I had hours, and sometimes hours are enough to dream of tomorrow. The counting stick doesn't lie. I haven't done enough. I owe warmth, and the frost doesn't care about excuses. They knocked at dawn, not hard, not loud, just once. That was enough. I was already up, had been for an hour, turning coals, boiling snow, rubbing warmth into my thighs to get the blood moving. The boy still slept beside the cow, curled so tightly I wasn't sure he could uncurl again. I opened the door before they knocked again. Hannel stood in the grey. Behind him, the wind shifted like it was waiting for my answer. He didn't speak, just held out the stick. One look told me everything. 3 notches carved down its side, each marked in soot. 2 were already burned through. The 3rd remained. It meant I'd taken more heat than I'd earned. The communal fires weren't free. The huddles weren't gifts. You stood by the stove, you added your name to the ledger, and when the coals came, so did the counting stick. You either kept it balanced or paid. I looked at Hannel's face, blank, tired, not cruel, but not kind either. I took the stick from him. "Tonight," I said. He nodded and turned without a word. I closed the door and ran my fingers along the grooves. The notches were shallow, but precise. Someone had cared enough to carve them straight. Someone had cared enough to make sure no one forgot what was owed. The problem wasn't that I disagreed. The problem was they were right. I hadn't done enough. I hadn't cut wood for the storehouse, hadn't brought rabbit to the communal stew. I'd missed 2 frost shifts and hadn't spoken up when Mira mentioned the theft from the grain pile. I'd been hiding behind my own cold, my own fire, and now the tally had caught up. The boy stirred, rubbed his eyes. "What's that?" he asked. "Debt. To who?" "Everyone." He looked down at the stick in my hand. "How much do we owe?" "1 notch. What happens if we don't pay it?" "They come. For more than heat." He understood, even if he didn't want to. I set the stick on the bench near the hearth and thought about what I still had. The rat I'd trapped 2 days ago still strung up in the shed, a sack of pine bark, 2 sap-coated cloths, 1 egg the cow refused to crush. And time. That was the rarest of all. By midday, I had a plan. I went out to the Deadwood Hill. The trees there had long since died, but still stood, brittle as bones, waiting to be cut. But no one wanted them. They smoked too much, cracked loud when burned, and made every pot taste like ash. I wanted them anyway. I took the axe and climbed the ridge. The wind followed me. I dropped the first tree in 6 swings. The wood split where it hit the ground. I didn't mind. I took the biggest half and dragged it back, arms screaming. On the way down I passed Mira. She didn't speak, just stared at the stick tied to my belt. I nodded. She didn't nod back. Back at the house I chopped the log into 6 bundles. Not perfect, not clean, but enough to burn long and loud. That evening I brought them to the stove. The communal hall was nearly full, 30 of us packed shoulder to shoulder, breath steaming, eyes down. I dropped the wood beside the fire. The room didn't cheer. No one thanked me. They just stepped aside and I took my place. The stick was passed forward. I held it to the coals until the last notch blackened and curled. Hannel watched. He nodded once. I tossed the stick into the flame and stepped back. Later, when I returned home, the boy was asleep. The cow shifted and rose to her knees, lowing once in the dark. I sat by the hearth and rubbed my arms. The smell of pine ash still clung to my coat. It didn't matter. I'd paid my due. For now. Even they're afraid. They cluck in the dark, sensing something I don't yet see. Maybe it's the wolves. Maybe it's us. It started with 1. A single, sharp cluck in the middle of the night, not a sound of warning but confusion, a low, tight noise that sat wrong in the air. I didn't sit up right away. I listened. Another cluck, then a shuffle, wings fluttering against slats, a scrape of claw against wood. They were awake. All of them, even in the dark. The coop wasn't far from the house. 10 paces from the door, maybe less. But in a night like this, 10 paces was a journey. The frost was heavy, clinging thick to the eaves. The wind had quieted, not gone. It sat like a crouching animal, waiting to rise again. I rose slowly, trying not to wake the boy. He lay beneath the wool, curled tight. The cow stirred but didn't rise. I threw on the coat, still stiff with sap and ash, and stepped outside. The coop door was latched. I opened it, slow. Inside 7 birds. Feathers puffed, eyes wide. 1 sat on the perch, but the rest huddled in the corner near the feed trough. They weren't sleeping, not even pretending. They clucked low, quick, panicked bursts. Not alarm calls, not fight, just fear. The kind of fear that came from knowing something was wrong without knowing why. I scanned the ground. No tracks, no blood. The feed hadn't been touched. Still, they stared. At me. At the shadows. I shut the door and returned to the house. Inside, the boy had sat up. "They're loud," he said. "I know. Something wrong? Maybe." He watched me from the bedding hollow, eyes just above the wool. I went to the hearth and stirred the coals. The light flared enough to show the edges of the room. "I don't hear anything," the boy said. "That's what worries me. Animals don't lie. They don't imagine. They don't dream about danger. If they feel it, it's there." I sat down on the bench and pulled off. One boot rubbing at the arch where the cold had stiffened the muscle. The boy asked, "Do you think it's wolves?" I thought about it. Maybe. But wolves didn't usually come this close. Not without warning. Not without hunger, heavy on the wind. I remembered a night years ago, before the cold had come like this. A pack had circled the pasture, eyes gleaming in the torchlight, their breath rising white against the dark. Back then, there were dogs to bark, neighbours to shout, steel in the barn. Now there was none of that, just chickens, just me, and silence. The boy shifted. "I don't think it's wolves," he said. "Why not?" "They're scared, but they're not hiding." That stuck with me. They weren't cowering, just restless. No predator outside, no moon above, just something wrong in the air. The cow moaned low from her corner. I looked at her. She was standing now, not alarmed, just uneasy. I stood, walked to the door again, and stepped outside. The world was still, the trees didn't move, the wind held its breath. But the sky. I looked up. The clouds were pulling apart, long grey ribbons stretching from horizon to horizon, gaps forming between them, long slashes of black so deep it felt like the night had been cut open. Stars blinked through, dozens, hundreds, all too bright, too fast. Then I saw it. A faint line, a shimmer, a trail of green bending and flickering. The sky had begun to move. The aurora. It had come early this year. Not a curtain, more like a crack, something peeling back. I watched it dance, quiet and slow. Then I heard the chickens again. Cluck, shuffle, a short squawk, like they didn't trust the sky. I went back inside. The boy was watching me. "You saw it," he said. "Yes." "Does it mean something?" "Maybe." He nodded, like that was all he needed. I threw another log on the fire, not because we needed the heat, but because I needed something solid to watch. "I think they feel it," I said. "The chickens, all of us." He lay back down. "I don't want to be scared of the sky." I didn't have an answer for that. I sat beside the hearth, boots still wet, breath steaming in the firelight. The chickens didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. The baby cries too long. The mother doesn't wake. I feed the child bread I swore was mine. The frost rewrites every vow. The crying started before dawn. Not the sharp kind that demands attention. This was softer, worn, like the sound had been going on long before I woke, and only now reached my ears. It came from House 3, the one with the leaning roof, and the woman who used to trade dried berries for ash salt. I listened for the second voice, the one that should have hushed the child, rocked it, fed it. It didn't come. The boy was still asleep beside me, limbs tucked tight beneath the wool. The fire was low, but alive. I didn't think. I dressed. I left. Outside, the wind was quiet. That scared me more than the cold. At the door of House 3, I knocked once. No answer. The baby kept crying. I stepped inside. It was dark. The hearth hadn't been lit. I could see my breath, long and white. Frost clung to the inside of the beams. She was on the bedding pile, face turned away, still. The baby lay in the hollow beside her, arms flailing in weak rhythm. Red cheeks, soaked cloth, mouth open and searching for something that wasn't there. I stood, frozen a moment, my boots still at the door. Then I moved. I knelt beside the mother, touched her shoulder. Cold, not stiff yet, but gone. Her hands were curled into the blanket, like she'd meant to hold on and simply didn't. I looked at the baby again. He was small, smaller than I remembered, a smear of ash on his forehead. His cries came in bursts now, thin, hoarse. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the last piece of bark bread I'd saved from the night before, cracked and dry, wrapped in linen meant for me. I broke it in half and soaked it in water from the pouch at my hip, kneaded it soft between fingers, then pressed the pulp into the baby's mouth. He sucked, coughed, swallowed, then reached for more. I fed him again. Yes, low, small pinches. It wasn't food, it was surrender, stretched into crumbs. He kept eating. I didn't know his name, I didn't know hers either. But here we were. When the feeding stopped, he dozed. I sat beside the cold woman and watched the frost spread across the beam above her. It hadn't snowed last night, but the temperature had dropped low enough to steal air from the lungs. Quiet deaths, the kind that come without screams. She had probably given him the last of her heat, folded him into her chest and let the cold take the rest. I wrapped him in the thickest cloth I could find and carried him back to my house. The boy was awake by then. He looked at me, then at the bundle in my arms. I didn't speak, just laid the child near the hearth and fed the fire what I could. "Where's the mother?" the boy asked. "Gone." He nodded. "What do we do?" "We keep him warm." "And after?" "We figure that out." The baby stirred once, opened his mouth. No sound came. The boy leaned close and said, "We don't have enough." "I know. I thought you said no one else. No more mouths." "I did." "Then why?" "Because frost rewrites every vow." We sat there, the three of us, listening to the fire try its best to burn, and the air trying just as hard to unmake it. I'd given away what I swore I'd keep, and I'd do it again. Because sometimes survival isn't just eating and breathing. Sometimes it's feeding someone smaller than you, even if it kills you. The roof drips black. The house groans. I dream of summers I never lived through and wake to coughing. The first drip landed on the bedding, dark, sticky, cold. I reached for it in my sleep, half dreaming, fingers brushing wet wool before I understood. The second drop hit my wrist. I sat up fast. The fire was low, but the room glowed faintly, flickering orange against blackened beams. The ceiling above the hearth shimmered like tar, had been painted in long, uneven strokes. Smoke curled, thin but heavy, gathering under the rafters like breath that wouldn't leave. I'd seen this before, once, years ago, in someone else's house. A chimney choked by its own stubbornness, a roof that had taken on too much soot, too much oil, and began to sweat it out when the weather turned warm. Only this wasn't warmth. This was something else. The cow shifted behind me, her hooves scraped wet straw. The boy coughed once in his sleep, then again, sharp and wet. I stood slowly. The roof dripped again, this time into the hearth. The hiss was soft, but it raised every hair on my arms. I grabbed the poker and stirred the coals. They flared for a moment, then choked again under a film of black grease seeping from above, the reed funnel. It had begun to clog. All those nights of slow-burning sap and green bark had left a coat behind. Now it melted with the heat, turning smoke into pitch. I needed to clear it, but not now, not in the dark. The house groaned above me, the sound of wood swollen with memory and smoke. It didn't creak, it complained. I pulled the boy's blanket higher. He turned away from me, muttering something in his sleep. "Don't go," I thought I heard. Or maybe it was, "Don't glow." I didn't ask. I stepped outside instead. The sky was stained with stars. Too many, too close. The aurora still clung to the north, faded now, but not gone. The wind had gone from a whisper to something more personal. It didn't bite, it asked. It asked if I remembered summer, and I did. Not real memories, not ones I'd lived, but the kind that come in dreams, of bare feet on warm earth, bees circling thick blooms, sweat running down the spine without fear of what it meant. I stood in the doorway and let the cold wrap around me like penance. Inside, the smoke hung low. I fetched the short ladder from beside the shed. It creaked worse than the roof. The top rung had split last month, and I'd never fixed it. I climbed anyway. The reed chimney stuck out just above the peak, barely a foot of it still clear of snow. I scraped my fingers along the inside. Tar came off in ribbons, thick, black, alive with memory. It smelled like everything we'd burned since frost first came. Pine, fir, dung, soot, desperation. I scraped until my fingers ached, until I couldn't feel them. Then I stuffed a cloth through the gap to keep it from leaking overnight. Inside, the boy had woken. He was sitting up, coughing again. The cow stood now, pacing slightly, her hooves wet with dark slop. "Something's wrong," he said. "I know." "Is it the fire?" "No, it's what the fire remembers." I sat beside him and wiped the soot from my hands with a strip of old linen. It stained fast, then tore in two. We didn't speak for a while. Eventually I said, "Tomorrow I'll rebuild the pipe. Will it help?" For a little while. He nodded, eyes drifting closed again. I stayed up, stoking the hearth just enough to keep the floor warm. Smoke curled under the ceiling like the ghost of everything I'd burned to stay alive. That night I dreamed of bees, of summer fields I never walked, of flowers I couldn't name. And when I woke, the first thing I tasted was ash. She went down in the night. I carve her before dawn. It's not meat, it's time, bought in chunks and chewed slow. She didn't cry out. That's what I remember most. No noise, no kicking, just silence, the kind that fills a room before it breaks. I woke to cold air where warmth should have been. The fire had burned low, not out, but close, and the boy was still asleep beside the bedding stones. But the cow wasn't breathing. I knew the shape of her breath. I'd watched it fog the air in thick bursts every night for weeks. This time, nothing. I sat up and stared. She lay curled, her legs tucked awkwardly beneath her, chin resting on straw. Her eyes were open, glassy. A single drop of frost clung to her lower lid. I didn't move for a long moment, just sat there, watching. Then I stood, quiet, careful. I crouched beside her and placed my hand on her flank. Cold. No twitch, no breath, no heartbeat. I didn't say a word. I didn't wake the boy. Instead I fetched the knife. Not the short one I used for stew meat or string. The long one. The one meant for severing joints. The one I hoped I'd never use indoors. The house was still too warm to wait. Her body wouldn't keep, not for more than a few hours. The warmth we'd fought for was now my enemy. If I didn't act fast, the meat would sour, the fat would slip, the work I'd done to keep her alive would rot before I could turn it into time. So I started at the belly, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I carved slow, working the hide loose from the ribs, sawing through tendon and cartilage, keeping the cuts long and shallow to preserve what I could. It wasn't just meat I was taking, it was fire, oil, grease for boots, bones for broth. Time. Each piece meant a little more breathing, a little more warmth, a little more life. The boy stirred once in his sleep, but didn't wake. The knife caught on a tendon near the spine. I twisted, heard the pop, felt it echo up the handle. My hands were slick by then, fat and blood and grief mixed together, warm and thick. By the time the sun began to pale the edge of the window cloth, I had half of her carved and wrapped in oilcloth from the grain bin. I couldn't fit the rest in the house. I left it outside. Not for the scavengers, there weren't any left close enough to smell it, but because there was no space for a whole death in this room. When the boy finally woke, he looked toward her corner and didn't speak, just stared at the empty space, then at the piles wrapped near the hearth. "Is that her?" I nodded. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just said, "She was warm." "She still is," I said. We boiled water. We cleaned the blade. We scrubbed the stones. The blood stained anyway. The smell clung to the ceiling like memory. That night we ate a piece of liver, pan-seared on a flat rock, salted with ash and old hope. It didn't taste like grief. It tasted like hunger, answered. I didn't let the boy see how much I kept behind. The tongue, the marrow bones, the kidneys. I buried the hide under a layer of straw in the shed, not to save it, just to hide it. Something about the shape of it made the room feel colder. After he fell asleep, I stood over what remained, not of her, but of the days she bought us, and I counted 2 weeks of meat, if rationed, 4 if we boiled bones twice. The fat would stretch farther, into lamps, into soup, maybe even into trade. I sat down by the hearth, pressed my hand into the warmth of the stones. She had bought us time, and time was worth more than meat. Flour's gone, we grind bark, we chew boiled bone. Each meal shortens something inside me. The last handful of flour went into a flat cake 3 mornings ago. I didn't tell the boy until it was gone. He asked where the bread was. I said, "We're making something else now." I didn't lie, not exactly. There was something baking on the stone slab. It was round, it was dry, and it didn't rise, because it couldn't. I called it bone bread, not because of what was in it, but because of what wasn't. No wheat, no rye, no yeast, just bark, scraped from the pine at the edge of the shed, soaked, dried, then ground to dust, and bone meal from the cow, the brittle kind you get after boiling marrow twice, then drying the husks in the coals. I crushed it all with the back of the axe against a flat rock. The bark resisted, the bones didn't. They crumbled too easily. They always do, once the life's been boiled out of them. The first batch burned, the second stuck to the stone, the third held together, barely. I scraped it off the slab and let it cool beside the hearth. The boy sniffed it. "That's not bread." "No." "Then what is it?" "Something to keep us moving." He took a bite. I watched his face. The chew took effort. His jaw worked slow like grinding leather. He didn't spit it out, just swallowed, coughed once, and reached for water. Later, I ate mine alone. The taste was smoke. Fat, wood. The texture was wrong, crumbly and sharp at once, like chewing ash that remembered being a tree. But it filled the gap. Not all the way, just enough to quiet the noise. Each meal now feels like a trade. You put something in, and something goes missing, some part of you. Stomach, throat, memory, gone. You can't point to what it was, but you feel it. I stirred the pot while the boys slept. Nothing inside but fat scrap, root peelings and boiled bark. The broth turned pale, not clear, not dark, just something. Hung in between, like the colour of regret. He ate it anyway. So did I. Then I ground more bark. My fingers blistered along the edges. The grit worked into my nails, turned them brown. I didn't stop. I couldn't. 2 more rounds of bread needed shaping before sundown. That afternoon Mira stopped by. She didn't knock, just stood in the doorway with wind in her scarf and silence in her mouth. She saw the loaves on the slab. "You're using pine?" she asked. "Yes." "It won't hold." "It doesn't need to." She didn't argue. "You've still got meat?" "A little." She didn't ask to trade. That wasn't why she came. She held out a small tin. Inside, a pinch of ground lichen, dried and clean. A gift, not for flavour, but for digestion. "Use it," she said. "Bark will ruin his gut if it's all he eats." I nodded, took it without thanks. She left without looking back. That night, I added the lichen to the next batch of dough. It crumbled in, barely noticeable, like old snow stirred into soot. The boy chewed slower this time. "This one's better," he said. I didn't tell him why. I saved the last crust for the next morning, let it harden by the fire, cracked it in half and stored it in the pouch lined with hide. By now, food isn't food. It's hours, minutes, mouthfuls of survival carved from the walls of what once was life. I sat by the fire that night and chewed a crust. It tasted like loss, but it stayed down. That's what mattered. It hisses secrets, what I should have done, what I still might lose. I answer. I don't care if no one hears. The fire talks more now. Not just the usual pop and crackle of damp wood or frozen bark. It speaks, low and constant, like a whisper caught between breath and smoke, and I've started listening. Worse, I've started answering. It began 3 nights ago, when the coals hissed as I laid in a rib bone from the cow. The marrow had already been scraped, the hollow was clean, but when it hit the hearthstone, it let out a sharp hiss, then a sound like a voice choking on steam. I said without thinking, "I know," and after that the silence in the room felt wrong. Now I talk to it often, when the boy's asleep, when the air's too thin for dreams, when my hands ache from grinding bark, and my back won't unbend after hours over the slab. I stare into the orange and answer the fire like it's someone who remembers everything I've done and doesn't plan to forgive any of it. "You should have gone to the hill sooner," the fire says. "I didn't know," I answer. "You did. Not in time. You chose warmth over warning. I chose survival." Then it goes quiet, just long enough to make me think it's done. Until the next log drops, the embers shift, and it whispers again. Tonight the boy heard me. He didn't speak at first, just stirred in his blankets, eyes reflecting firelight like he was part of the smoke. Then, "Who are you talking to?" I didn't lie. "The fire." He didn't blink. "What's it say?" "It remembers." "Do you believe it?" "Sometimes." He rolled back over, pulling the wool up past his ears. That was enough for now. The fire hissed again. I waited, then fed it another scrap of fat, slick bark. "You're feeding me bones," it said. "I have nothing else. You'll run out." "I know. You should have saved her longer." "I couldn't. I didn't mean the cow." That silenced me. Outside, the wind poured at the corners of the door, but it didn't push hard. Not tonight. Even the wind seemed to know the fire had the floor. I leaned forward, staring into the coals. I saw faces in there, sometimes. Not real ones, just shapes, memories. Mira's son, the girl from House 6, the cow's eye before it clouded. They weren't haunting me, not really, just watching, listening to what I confessed when there were no more ears left. "Will we make it?" I asked. The fire said nothing. I smiled. That's what I thought. I threw on a pinch of lichen. The scent changed, a bit sharper. The boy shifted again, but didn't wake. The cow's corner was still empty. I hadn't replaced her. Wouldn't. The room echoed differently, without her breathing in it. Wider, lonelier, like we lived in a space meant for more lives than we had. The fire crackled once. "You could leave." "No," I said. "There's nothing out there. There's nothing in here. I didn't answer that one. Instead, I stood and stretched, joints popping in my hips and back. "I'm going to sleep now," I told it. "You always say that. This time I mean it. Until you wake to stoke me again." I paused. "Then we'll speak again." I lay beside the boy, feeling his body's warmth like a soft echo of the fire behind me. I pulled the wool up to my neck, closed my eyes. The hearth flickered one last time before going quiet. But I knew it would wait for me, and I would listen again. I sealed everything, but the wind still finds me. It's inside the walls, or maybe just inside me now. I used to think wind was a thing outside, something that howled past the door, something you barred with wood and stone and wool, something you could block out. But not now. Now it's inside. It doesn't bang or scream, it presses, like breath through old straw, like a whisper you can't name. I plug the window cloth tighter every night, shove moss into the seams, wedge wax between the stones. But it keeps coming. This morning, the fire was still alive, but my fingertips were numb. The boy's nose had bled in the night. I found the smear on his sleeve, wiped it with a warm cloth. He didn't wake. The cow's old corner creaks more than it should. It's not rot. I've checked. The wood isn't sagging, the wall isn't cracked. But something in the timbers shifts, not from pressure, but from something quieter, like the house is settling in ways it shouldn't. The boy speaks less. He watches the door, stares at the corners. I don't ask what he sees. I wake more often now, not from cold or pain, but from sound. Not real sound, just a sense of it. A murmur behind the hearth, a scuff behind the wall, a tone that doesn't belong. It's not mice, it's not rats. We haven't had those in weeks. The wind knows the way in, through the seams, through the gaps I missed, through the tiny sliver beneath the door, where frost pushes itself in like fingers testing a lock. I sealed everything. I know I did. But the draft moves around me anyway. I try not to talk to it. The fire I talk to, the fire answers. The wind doesn't, it just listens. Yesterday, the boy asked me if the house was breathing. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure what would happen if I did. Instead, I tore more strips from the bedcloth, packed them into the joints between beam and roof where the old daub has cracked. The smoke clings thicker these days, not from firewood, but from breath that won't rise. The air has weight, like it doesn't want to move. At night, I sit by the hearth and press my ear to the floor. Sometimes I think I hear it there too. The wind, breathing up from below. A house should never breathe from below. I told the boy to stop sitting so close to the corners. He asked if the cold came from there. I didn't say yes, but I did move his bedroll. He doesn't ask questions when I rearrange things anymore. He just watches me with that quiet acceptance that children wear when they're waiting for grown-ups to lie. I added a layer of bone ash to the seams near the door, an old trick I half remembered from someone else's story. They said it keeps out the wet. Maybe it keeps out other things too. That night, the wind changed directions. It didn't push from the north anymore. It pulled from inside. The walls didn't creak. They inhaled. The boy clutched my coat in his sleep, said something under his breath. I leaned closer but didn't catch it. He was still trembling by morning. We burned more than usual that day. 2 extra logs, 1 coated cloth, a chunk of cow fat meant for trade. I fed it all to the fire like an offering. It hissed, spat, then quieted. But the air didn't warm. I lit a second flame near the bedding hollow, a small one made of twigs and bark, just enough to glow. The boy didn't move closer. He watched it like it was something new, something unfamiliar. I listened for the wind, not outside, inside, in the bones of the walls, the base of the hearth, the places where warmth used to wait. The wind didn't howl, it sighed, and I realized it wasn't trying to enter anymore. It had already come in, and it was waiting. We don't speak, we just lie close, listen to breath, and pray it doesn't stop. Silence is heavier than snow. Tonight I don't ask him how he's feeling. I don't say, "Are you warm enough?" or "You need to eat more." I don't even say good night. We just lie down. One bed, no words. He presses his back to me like he always does. I feel the shape of his ribs against mine, too sharp, too small. The blankets barely hold around us. Every inch of fabric matters. Every breath must be kept. Every body part tucked under something or someone. There's no room for distance, and still the cold reaches in like it always does. But worse than the cold is the silence, not the quiet of rest, not the hush of sleep. This silence waits. It crouches over the fire. It listens to our lungs. It measures the space between inhales. He's stopped talking during the day, even when he's awake, alert, even when he's watching me stir the bark flour into water or scrape the frost from the inside of the door. He doesn't ask questions anymore, doesn't count the wood left or say he's hungry. He just watches. So I've stopped talking too. Words feel expensive now, more than meat, more than flame. They cost energy, they carry heat in the breath. If you waste them, you lose something you won't get back. Sometimes he hums, quietly. I think it's a tune his mother sang, or maybe I dreamed that part. When he does hum, I don't interrupt. I let it happen like a flake of snow on your sleeve. You don't stop to admire it or brush it away. You let it melt on its own. This morning, I woke first. The fire was gone. Not just low, gone. The coals grey and brittle, like old bone dust. I didn't panic. I just lay there waiting for the boy to stir. His breath was shallow, but it was there. When I finally moved, I did it slowly, kept the covers tight, slid out one limb at a time, careful not to let the heat escape. I rebuilt the fire with 2 twigs and a half-dried wad of cow fat. It caught on the 3rd try. While it built, I looked around the room. The walls were crying again, condensation pooling at the seams, the ceiling above the hearth stained black from last night's smoke. One of the beams near the cow's old corner had cracked. I could hear it ticking, soft as a heartbeat. No wind today, not outside, but the silence remained. I made broth with bone scraps, nothing rich, just hot. I poured him a bowl and nudged it into his hands without a word. He drank it, slowly, staring into the cup like he expected it to speak for me. I don't remember the last time we laughed. No, that's not true. I remember. It was over a lump of dough that fell into the ashes. He'd called it coal bread, and we'd both smiled, even though it was true. But that was days ago, maybe longer. Now, even the fire seems quiet. No crackle, just low breathing. We don't leave the house anymore, not unless we must. The outside has stopped pretending. The cold doesn't hide in wind or snow, it just is, pushing through the gaps in our bones, sitting between our shoulders when we try to sleep. That's why we lie close, too close. One bed, no space, no talk, just breath. I count his inhales as I fall asleep. 1, 2, 3, a pause, then 4, 5. Sometimes I count mine too. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I stopped breathing first. Would he notice? Would he lie still, pretending not to? Would he try to steal what warmth I'd left? He should. I'd want him to. When I wake, it's to the sound of him shifting in the dark. Still alive, still close. No words, just that unspoken agreement. You keep breathing, I keep breathing. You stay warm, I stay warm. We stay here, together, until we don't. I burn the broom, then the stool, then the door. If the fire dies, I die, and I'm not done yet. The last stick of proper wood went into the fire yesterday. It hissed like it knew, like it resented being final. I watched it burn all the way down. No coals, no ash, just dry light. Then I stood, walked to the corner and pulled the broom from the wall. I didn't hesitate. It was just a handle now, bristles long gone, worn smooth from winters past. I'd used it to push straw, to knock down webs, to feel useful, not anymore. I snapped it over my knee and fed both halves to the fire. They lit, fast. The wood was old, splinter dry, soaked in smoke and desperation. The boy stirred behind me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That was yesterday. Today, I burned the stool. The only seat in the room that wasn't floor or bedding. I unscrewed the legs with my belt hook, pried the crossbeams loose with my fingers. Splinters bit into my skin and stayed there. I threw each piece in like I was feeding a god I didn't worship anymore. The fire took it all, without thanks. No one asks what happens when the fire's gone. Not really. We pretend we'll find something, a fallen branch, a broken shutter, a kindness in the woods. But the woods are dead. The trees are ghosts. Kindness doesn't grow here anymore. When the stool was gone, I stood in the centre of the room and turned in a slow circle. Everything was still. The boy lay curled under the blanket, not asleep, not awake, just waiting. There was nothing else left to burn, except the door. I stared at it. Then I walked over, undid the latch, and pulled it off the hinges. It creaked like a confession. Cold poured in immediately, but I didn't care. I dragged it to the hearth and leaned it against the wall. I looked at the boy. He blinked once, said nothing. The air was already shifting. The wind knew what I'd done. But the fire needed feeding. I broke the bottom half of the door with the heel of my boot, took 3 kicks. The panel cracked, then split. I carried the first board to the flame and placed it in slow. It caught quickly. The room brightened. My skin stung from the sudden heat. I didn't care. I burned the next piece, then the next. The door was halfway gone before the boy finally spoke. "What will we do when there's nothing left?" I didn't lie. "We'll burn the walls." He nodded. No fear, just understanding. That's what happens, this close to the edge. You stop feeling dread. You start making lists. What's wood? What's not? What can break? What can burn? The rushes on the floor had long since rotted. I scraped some dried pieces from beneath the bedding and tossed them in. They flared up, oily and fast. I remembered something, suddenly, a story from before. A man who burned his own roof to stay alive, who cooked stew with splinters from his own rafters, who slept under frost while his fire danced on the bones of his house. I didn't remember how it ended. I took another piece of the door and dropped it into the fire. It cracked in half as it burned. The boy coughed. The air was sharp, dry. Too much smoke for too little room. Still, I didn't open a window. There was no window anymore, just a cloth nailed tight with pitch and prayer. The smoke curled above us, black, slow, full of memory. I sat down on the bedding, pulled the boy close, and held him there. "You warm?" I asked. He nodded. "Good, because when the fire dies, I die, and I'm not done yet." No fanfare, just drip, just mud. I step outside and feel water, not ice. I've lived another year, but not unchanged. I didn't hear spring coming. No birdsong, no breeze carrying green, no sudden sunbeam warming the floor. Just drip. A slow, steady tapping from the corner of the house. Not the angry patter of thawing snow. This was softer, patient, like the frost had given up its fight, quietly, while I slept. I didn't trust it at first. I sat still in bed, listening, waiting for the creak of frost to return, for the hiss of the wind slipping through the seam near the hearth. But all I heard was water, trickling off the roof, sliding down the beam, pooling somewhere just out of sight. The boy woke to it too. He blinked at the sound like it was something forgotten from a dream. "What's that?" he asked. "Drip," I said, "not freeze." His eyes widened. "You mean—" "I mean nothing yet," I said, "because that's how it starts. Not with green, not with bloom, but with less cold, less sharp, less death." I stood slowly. My knees creaked like the rafters. There wasn't much left of the door. Half of it had gone to the fire 2 nights ago, but the top panel remained, hung sideways across the frame with rope and prayer. I unhooked it and stepped outside. And the first thing I felt wasn't wind, it was softness. The ground, once packed and frozen solid, was loose beneath my feet. My boots sank slightly. Not much, just enough to hold a print. I looked down. Mud. Real mud. Brown, wet, ugly, alive. I looked to the trees. No leaves yet. No buds. But the bark no longer looked brittle. It had darkened, as if it had remembered its purpose. Above, the clouds were still there, but thinner, moving. And the drip, it kept going. From the eaves, from the edge of the coop, from the bowed backside of the shed. I could hear it now, everywhere. Water, not ice. The boy stood behind me, barefoot on the thea, reeshold, eyes wide. "It smells different," he said. It did. Less smoke, less sweat. The thick musk of winter had faded, peeled back like a second skin. "It's not spring yet," I said. He nodded. "But it's starting." I nodded too. I walked to the coop. The chickens, silent for weeks, moved when I opened the hatch. One clucked, another pecked at the doorframe. They remembered too. Inside, the house still smelled of bone and ash. The hearth was low, but not dead. I fed it a stick I'd saved, my last one, meant for a night I wasn't sure I'd live to see. I burned it now, not for heat, for thanks. I looked at the walls, blackened, cracked, but still standing. I touched the corner beam, half wrapped in moss and cloth, still holding. The boy had gone to the rush pile and was scooping mud with his hands. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Testing." "For what?" "To see if it's warm." I smiled. It wasn't warm, not really, but it wasn't frozen, and that was enough. Later we sat by the fire and shared the last of the bone broth. I scraped the bottom for fat. He chewed on a bark crust too tough to swallow. We didn't talk much. There weren't words big enough, just silence between sips. I thought about the door I'd burned, the stool, the broom. I thought about the cow, about Mira, about the stick, and the fire that hissed secrets, and the wind that knew too much. I thought about the house, and what I was before I built it. Before I dug the floor, packed the daub, sealed the seams with pitch and quiet. Before the boy had a name, before I forgot mine, and I realized something. I had made it, but not all of me. Something had been shaved off in the process, layer by layer, like bark ground into bread, and what was left wasn't what had begun this winter, but it was enough. Tomorrow I'd go to the hill, see if Mira was still standing, see if anyone else had opened a door and felt mud instead of frost. But tonight, just drip, just breath, just bones and silence and a fire that didn't need feeding, and one print in the mud that hadn't filled in yet,